Hello and welcome to another edition of the CBB Super Show. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuce 85, the niche sports connoisseur. And as you can see, I'm joined here by Tar Heel superfan and MLB fantasy baseball sports writer of the year. Got a real one here with us tonight. Feeling very excited. It is the eve. It is the night before all of the madness. Playing games are over. We are ready to start. 64 teams are ready to vie for the tournament crown, as it should be. We did the selections, Sunday watch party, did some brackets on Monday, talked a little bit with Mike last night on some thoughts and some bets. But tonight is where we are going to break down all 16 games of round one, day one, and it is a doozy of a slate. Can't wait to talk about this. Before we get into it, though, I do want to say, Adam, you laid it on the line there on Sunday. You did your thing. You line in the sand, which is a man after my own heart because I like to be that way as well. And you were right. North Carolina looked pretty damn good yesterday. Xavier, they needed a lifeline. They needed Marcus Foster to hard carry them. He hasn't played well in like 2 months. They got in, but North Carolina got to be feeling good about that one, eh?
For sure. And I did say that North Carolina and Xavier were tied together before the selection show, and apparently they both got in and they both won. So I guess that theory is correct, but obviously North Carolina looked a bit more dominant doing it. I think a lot of it had to do with perhaps their opponent was a bit weaker. I think Texas punched Xavier in the mouth a little bit, but you saw at the end of that game, Zach Fremantle made some big plays. It just seemed like the more veteran team knew how to close that game out. And maybe the younger, more inexperienced, more razzled team was Texas there. But certainly 2 good playing games out of the 4. We had one of the high major games today be exciting, whereas yesterday was a blowout and vice versa with the 16 seeds. But how great is it to be, Thursday game eve of another March Madness? It's the best time of year.
It is, man. It is. I absolutely love this week. Like the whole thing leading into it with the watch party, doing the brackets on Monday. And then, it's going to be waking up, be very little sleep for me personally, but waking up and getting started, being on the West Coast. Those games begin at 9:15 in the morning for me. So it's just like ready to go, drop the kids off at school. Got to get game streaming here. Got the TV on here. Upstairs loud enough to hear. Got game streaming on the laptop. Got the missus laptop. Like there's games just going everywhere. Super excited. This slate is gargantuan, but this is the best. Like I love the bigger slates. I know you kind of like the smaller slates, but everybody's got to feel good about this one. Tons of contests going on. Before we delve into this slate, do want to remind people to, if you're not already, make sure you're subscribed to the FTN YouTube channel. And please make sure if you're watching live or on demand, you hit that like button. If you're over on Twitter/X, if you could mosey on over to YouTube, it does help us a tremendous amount. You guys have been showing up and showing out in droves for all of our content on FTN, both on YouTube and on the site. Tons of new subs and community members. It's fantastic. Big win for Xavier today and the cover. That was something that all of us in the community were pretty much on the betting side, so that felt good. Good win for Xavier. Zach Fremantle, foul trouble in the first half. They get through, and now the field is set. We had the NIT nonsense happen today, a lot of stuff. And American, shout out to American. If Matt Rogers hadn't have gotten injured, I think that would have been a much more competitive game. At like 7 points in 3 minutes. Always tough when you have a serious injury to have that happen. Hopefully we avoid those injuries, though, in round one for our players and any foul trouble that may happen. What we'll do here is work tried and true game-by-game analysis. It is a ton of games, so in order to not be here for 6 hours, I could do it. We'll try to streamline it and be efficient as possible here. And then as we're going through, Adam, if you have any bets for the particular game that we're talking about that you want to throw out there, no pressure or anything, but if you have one that you like, feel free to throw that out there as well, and we'll get through. As far as the content schedule for tomorrow, the actual breakdown of the slate will be out bright and early in the morning, and projections will be out probably overnight before I go to sleep. I'm actually still playing with the minutes projections, but that'll be out pretty soon as well. And we'll, 4 or 5 hours before lock, we'll be ready to go and delving in here and grinding some games. And there's some injury stuff that we'll have to talk about and look at too, but it's just been kind of every day in the CBB streets. And feel free to ask questions, drop comments, any concerns, anything at all in the chat. We will pop those up there. So you guys are showing up in the chat there. Warren, thanks for showing up. Appreciate you. Razzle says this is where the party is. Good to see him. He's on extra duty as a baseball guy. He's got like opening day and already in Japan and everything else. So he's pretty tired guy already. Carolina getting an extra day of rest means Bubba strikes again. That was kind of weird that the play-in game ended up like that, like 3 play-in winners on Friday, 1 on Thursday. Sent FDN an invite to the West Virginia governor. We'll see what happens. Hey, maybe. Before you go to sleep, you aren't going to sleep. I talked to you, Raz, like I can't pull the all-nighters anymore. Like the closer I've gotten to 40, it just feels like a hangover. So it doesn't feel like sleep, but it's like an hour or two. And I try to power nap. I've been trying to get you on those power naps. All right, let's delve into this first game here on the slate. Creighton versus Louisville, a very jam-packed and will be a close game throughout for an 8-9 battle. Both teams probably could have had a much higher seed here and a better matchup in the first round. In Lexington, though, uphill battle here for Creighton. It is a 2.5-point spread currently on DraftKings. It is a total of 145.5. I'm going to get the projections pulled up here on what I have now, but why don't you start us off with this one, because it's kind of become a joke now, but you had a pretty strong take in the RotoWire draft yesterday or a day or two ago about Ryan Kalkbrenner, whether he makes 1 game, 2 games, go on a run. He projects pretty well, as you might imagine, so I know you like him. What do you think about this game?
I know his price is a little too high for this game. We have 16 games, I believe, so there's so many players out there. The pool is huge. We can be picky. For at least for your RotoWire league, I was intrigued by Kalkbrenner. He averages about 40 fantasy points a game. So, even if you only get 1 game out of him and he puts up that 40, you're really not getting killed by that. Now, I know he's in the 8-9 matchup, so you assume maybe a maximum of 2 games, but let's assume he does get past Louisville and Creighton gets by that matchup. Then you take another 40. Maybe that's 80 points from a player who I believe went undrafted in that league. That's a bit interesting to me. So 40 to 80 points left on the table there, undrafted. That's why I had a little bit of a strong take, but I know he went, I think, in the 8th round of our league tonight. So maybe I had a little bit of influence there.
There's, CBB is already kind of a niche for DFS and fantasy. And then you get into like these tournament leagues, which are like super niche of the niche. And you don't have a lot of content surrounding that player list. I know we got the best ball stuff on Underdog, but people like there's still a lot of newness, I guess, for lack of a better term, around how to draft for these leagues. Mainly what we know is we want to try to stack as much as possible teams that we think are going to go far. And sometimes when you have those teams that, nobody consensus or people just don't feel like are going to win more than 1 game or a game at all, they tend to fall to the end of the draft or not at all. But you make a compelling point. Kalkbrenner putting up a 60 compared to, let's say, Melik Wilson for Houston getting 4 games, but puts up 5 to 10. Like, there's definitely a lot of different ways to go and strategy. And maybe next year we'll plan ahead and have like a lot more leagues and a lot more creative content surrounding that. All right, so I have the projections on the screen here, playing around with the different ways that this is, right? And if this is clear and okay, we'll roll with this. Otherwise, I'll go to my layout number 7 I always use, which puts us up in the corner. So you guys can give me that feedback if you'd like. You can see here. I don't know why Gonzaga's on there. Let's pull them off.
I was going to say, I see some Gonzaga guys I like on there.
Yeah. You can already tell there's a preview of a team there. This is all messed up. Okay. I've been having some trouble here. My system was giving me some problems. All right, here we go. So as you can see, Ryan Kalkbrenner, it's expensive, 9.7. As we go through these games, you're going to see like the slate itself is priced pretty tight. You're not going to see a ton of players over 10K. So that might lull you into this sense that, hey, we can fit some guys because there's not that many that are expensive. But then you're going to see there's a lot that are usually in that mid-range sweet spot for us between 5 and 7K that are higher, maybe closer to 8K, 5K guys in that 7K range. So it's kind of pushed the middle out. And we don't have those value plays that we've kind of relied upon, especially in the early part of the season, which means this slate does have the potential to be not only very low scoring, but also have a ton of bad lineups and busts everywhere. Because if you do roster one of these expensive guys, Kalkbrenner won't bust, of course, but let's say, my screen's still messed up. Let's say that Kalkbrenner puts up a 20. I know he's going to do better than that, but let's say he puts up a 20. And then the value that you rostered in his place, because they're speculative, puts up a 5, like you're just done. And there's going to be a lot of lineups like that. Now, if Kalk carries his weight and he does his thing and he puts up a 50, then that value that you kind of took a shot on, their 5 is much easier to stomach. But that's just going to be the risk you're going to take here, especially on a slate where, hey, I'd like to go balance, but the balance just doesn't seem like we will have that option. We're going to try to figure it out. Kalkbrenner, top projected play in the game. Pretty much no surprise there because he plays 37 to 38 minutes, right? Same with Ashworth, Jemiah Neal. They're a 3-horse team. We have seen Jackson and Andrew have some nice games, and I do expect him to play closer to 30 minutes as well. Fedor Zugic, who is a player I like for next year, is questionable for this one, dealing with various injuries. He does play about 15 to 16 minutes, so those push over to Jason Green, who we've seen play over 30 the last couple of games, and into Jackson McAndrew's pool. Not a lot there for me. Jackson McAndrew is priced over 5K. I like it a lot better when he's in that 4.5, 4.6 range. If he was under 5K, I think that would be the main way for me to get exposure to this Creighton team or this game in general. But since it's over 5K, I'm going to have to be a little bit more picky. You do have Noah Waterman, if you believe in what he's been doing lately, at 4.4, but that's definitely got some risk to it. Jason Green, I mentioned, has been playing extremely well lately over the last 2 games, but I don't want to get sucked into that. Mainly just want to stick to the top 3 guys on Creighton if you can fit them. And Stephen Ashworth, maybe the most playable there at 8.4. We know what he can do. I know you're a big fan of his as well. He can get hot. He's had a couple of down games. Interesting battle brewing individually between him and Chucky Hepburn, perhaps, who is 9'6", going to be hard to play him. We had the hit over the weekend on Terrence Edwards. Now I'm sort of backing off on him. It's just a weird game. And the fact that it starts at the very beginning, I think I'd almost like mentally want more parts of this game if it was later. And I know technically, if you talk to Aaron, there's no bearing on when the game starts. It's going to be what it's going to be. But I just don't want to jam myself up super early here because the edge of this tighter price slate is going to be able to materialize from having this injury news, being able to swap. We have to be ready. Yes, these locks happen at all different times, and oftentimes the games run longer, so they lock early. So sometimes we don't get that starter news, but we're going to be combing over Twitter. We're going to be checking message boards. We're going to be hitting all the places we can to get that news early, especially on games like Houston and others where we have some injury designation. So want to have that PMR. That is one of the bigger edges for us this season and has been continually. So you can definitely get exposure here, but it feels more like a GBP type-ish game here because I do feel like some of the old reliable type players in this one are going to end up bricking out. And I'm looking at Terrence Edwards, especially at that 9K price. All right, let's move on here. Screen's messing up. Technical difficulty. Yeah. Give us those low-scoring slates. Yes, Brett, we like them. And then I've got lots of Kalkbrenner love here, not just from Brett, but also Warren says Kalk smash. So maybe Kalkbrenner's ownership will be a little bit higher than we expect, perhaps. All right, let's move on to the next game here. High Point versus Purdue. Total of 153.5. Purdue is an 8.5-point favorite. Coming into this one, super excited. I felt like High Point, they're super deep, 10 to 11 guys. There's no drop-off in production when those bench pieces come in. In fact, the bench played the last 10 to 11 minutes of the conference tournament to bring it home for them. There's a lot to like here, but they play a style of defense, and Mike Kutry broke it down for us last night, that Braden Smith is absolutely going to annihilate them. Guards, especially lead guards, have decimated High Point all year long, and they haven't played a team with a guard the caliber of Braden Smith. And we can tilt and say, well, all the stuff when we roster Braden Smith, he bricks. But this is a really good matchup for him. Purdue's not winning by over 8.5. I think that High Point covers this one, and I do have High Point picked to win in my bracket as well. But after talking with Mike last night and listening in a little bit more to some other opinions, it does seem like it's going to be a really tough uphill battle for High Point, especially with Braden Smith. He is priced pretty cheap, under 10K. We have the whole, earlier in the season, the old adage, if he's under 10K, roster him. If he's over, think about it. He's pretty close there at that 9.9 price. He's had some down games. Trey Kaufman-Wren has been running extremely hot, but this is one game where I think Braden Smith might deliver one of those, 18 to 20 real point games, 8 to 9 assists, a bunch of steals, some rebounds. Like suddenly we're looking at it like, damn, didn't roster Braden Smith in the early window. He dropped to 60. That might be tough. So I am a little bit concerned that he might be a higher owned pay up. Purdue's been a team that tilts us. They don't have much in terms of secondary plays. CJ Cox, Miles Bunny Coven, they're freshmen and sophomore younger guys. Can't trust them in a spot like this. High Point has veterans, but they also have not played teams in the P4, P5 level very often over the last couple of years. They just dominate in their conference because they have the resources to do so, but they're going to be gut tested here. And I don't want to fall into a trap like I fell in last year with McNeese State. Love them coming into the tournament, and Gonzaga absolutely smacked them around. Don't want to fall for that trap. I don't think that happens here, but I'm definitely nervous about it. Where are you at with Braden Smith and anyone else in this game?
Yeah, first of all, I want to apologize if you were talking to me earlier and I just wasn't responding. I don't know if that was the technical difficulties. You froze on me for like 20 or 30 seconds and came back. So I have no idea if you asked me a question. I was just staring at the screen.
No, you're good. I was messing up my screen on my projections. I think that's what he's talking about. So we're good.
Okay. Yeah, but anyway, so this game, it's an interesting one. I mean, High Point we saw in the conference title game. I mean, High Point, I'll admit, I haven't seen much of them at all this year. I'm not an expert on them, but I know you had mentioned in the broadcast and mentioned that they essentially just went to their bench in that conference title game and just rode their bench basically the entire second half. It's almost like they had one team play in the first half, another team play in the second half. I was looking through some of their minutes and their rotations. It seems just very unpredictable. I know Bodo at 5'6", he's a player I really like. I think they're going to have him out there, so I'm not necessarily against that. But other than that, I'm a little just worried about their rotation. And what if the coach just pulls the trigger on a hockey rotation again and just puts those 5 guys off the bench onto the court? So that's a little worrisome for me. And I think just my general unfamiliarity with the team has me kind of avoiding it. I mean, I have some guys written down, but I'm not sure if I'll get there. As for Purdue, I think you nailed it. Braden Smith, if this is going to be a close game, it's going to be a lot of Braden Smith. You mentioned that High Point's susceptible to guards. He's under 10K. I think it's just as long as you know that the game has a chance to be competitive, I have interest there. Kaufman-Wren's a little too expensive for my taste. He's very consistent. Seems to be more of a cash game option these days, but at 9-1, I think I'd rather just pay the extra 8 to get up to 9-9 with Braden Smith. Fletcher Lawyer would normally interest me at 5K, but away from Mackey, he's been pretty mediocre. So I'm not sure on a massive slate like this, I'm itching to get him even in the mid-range. So it's probably Braden is the top option for me. I'm not sure if I'll go there, but High Point, just their rotations and inconsistency and my unfamiliarity has me a little shook there.
Yeah, and then you'll see on the projections there, like that just a very good individual matchup and stylistically for Braden Smith, but he doesn't necessarily project that great. And you've kind of led the charge on, hey, if this guy with Yaxel, Lendenberg especially, if they're priced up at this High Point and 10K plus, they're still projecting way over 4X, like how we got to find a way to get them in. And if this was a situation where I had Braden like, hey, he's way over 45 fantasy points, but he's just about like 39, 40, which is definitely good, safe for Survivor, definitely playable. But I do worry and question about, does he reach that ceiling for those GBP fields? Is he going to get the 60? A lot of people think he is. That kind of makes me feel like, leverage wise, if he ends up being a little bit higher owned, maybe he gets closer to 20, 25%. I know it's a huge slate, so anyone getting to 20% is massive, but there's a very real possibility for Braden Smith to be that way. So if he does underperform or something happens, gets into foul trouble, doesn't make his shots, goes 2 for 11, something like that early, it's just going to be a pretty big leverage over the rest of the field potentially in tournaments. I know you think like that a lot, very sharp with the way that you play those large fields. So that's something to think about. And High Point, everybody's priced cheap, but it's because they play so many guys. And just like what happened in the conference top final, if the starters come out slow and Purdue jumps them, they'll go right to that bench. Bobby Pettiford, he could start for a lot of other programs. He started he didn't start for Kansas, but that's where he started his career. And then he played at East Carolina, where he was really good. So he's been around and he knows how to win games, believe it or not. I know he didn't do it as much at ECU, but he showed it in that title game. And if he hadn't played so well, they would not be here right now. So definitely some interest in these guys because of the prices. Kamani Hamilton is very cheap, all things considering, under 7K for what he can do. Kazaa Jiffa at 6'1". Like if this was a conference game or High Point was on a slate like in the regular season, we'd be all over the 6'1" price regardless of who their opponent is. High usage rate, high shot rate. He's fantastic. But again, going to be saying this a lot tonight. It's such a large slate. I don't know if I do pull the trigger there. Projects pretty well over 4X, but it would be a lot more comfortable for me if I knew he'd play 38, 39 minutes, and he might. That's a very real possibility. But again, if they get off to a slow start, they'll go to Pettiford. They'll go to some of their other guys like Burnham. Demorian Williams has been playing like really, really rough lately, so they've been pulling him out first. And we're seeing a lot of split minutes here. Abalatium and a lot of other guys. Terry Anderson, Chase Johnson is another starter that plays split minutes, so it's very difficult to get there. Much better, much more confident in betting them than I am for the DFS side of things. But if you're running multiple lineups, especially in the Minimax or in the large field $20, Keza Jiffa at 6'1" is just like a silly price, all things considering. All right, let's move on here to Montana and Wisconsin, another part of the early window. Wisconsin is a 16.5-point favorite, total of 151.5. The chatter here and the worry is Wisconsin, short turnaround, played multiple games in multiple days. Now they got to play an elevation. Montana's used to that. Might there be a upset potential? I don't know that there will be, just because when you look at the efficiency numbers and metrics and all that, the Montana defense is just so porous. They absolutely will get decimated, I think, ultimately. And I believe Wisconsin has a very solid chance to cover the 16.5. I don't know that I'll end up pulling the trigger on guys like John Blackwell and John Tanye because we're paying that upper tier price, 7-1 and 8-5. Tanye's been great. I know he won a lot of the community members some money in the semis, not as much in the finals there, but we know he's up and down, and I worry about his shooting not being there. He's going to get volume, but if they get out in front and they're able to exploit the inside, which they should be able to with their size differentials, which means Nolan Winter and Steven Krell, I know that's scary. I think Tanje might have a game where he racks up some assists, but I don't know that he's going to score enough to pay off this 8-5. And I do worry about his shot being a little bit rough here, being tired and playing that elevation. Same can be said for Blackwell, although he's less shot reliant. He does get those peripherals, so he's fine if you do want to go there. But the projections love Steven Krell. They always do. I always have to like manually turn him down, which I haven't done any of that yet. So you see he's projecting like bazooka times a million, almost 5X. We'll turn him down a little bit, but he does have a really good individual matchup against this Montana front court. He's only 5'3". It's a really good way to get exposure to this Wisconsin team that we do expect to score possibly 90-plus points. I do think it'll be a little spread out, and I do worry lately Krell's doing this thing where he's like quarterbacking a conservative offense where he's hanging out the top of the key and just passing, not really loving that too much. They're not setting him up on the block, but this is a good spot for them to do so and get him a little bit confidence here heading into the second round. Same can be said of Nolan Winter, who was really good in the first 10 games of the non-con, really hasn't been since. He did have a blow-up game like 3 or 4 games ago. We haven't seen that too much from him, but he's also fairly cheap at 4.8. Doesn't project as well as Krell, but I think that's the way we want to go in this game if you can stomach rostering one of those two options. Also, the projections last Montana slate loved Austin Patterson. He is I think he got a little bit lucky because he had 1 million steals in that game, but it once again likes him. He's pretty interesting to me. I do have plans to get some exposure because he's only 4.1K. 27 minutes against Idaho was just forcing a ton of turnovers. Wisconsin will take care of the ball a little bit better than I think Idaho would. But if he gets over 20 minutes at that price, he does enough peripherals wise to be somewhat of an interesting value there. More of a GPP look. And then of course we have everybody's favorite, Money Williams. Comes off the bench, but he's the most expensive player on Montana, and for good reason. Has high usage rate. Didn't play well in their win over North Colorado, and they only gave him 19 minutes, which is a bit worrisome. But I think in a game like this, he should play 32, 33 minutes. And at that time frame and his shot and usage, he's an excellent GPP look. Wisconsin's good defensively, don't get me wrong, but I'm not terrified of them by any means. And I think Money's probably taking 15-plus shots. And if he, makes a decent number of those 40%, he's going to pay off this price. And then you got to factor in the other stuff he does, like pass well, get assists, get steals. He does a little bit of everything for this Montana team. So I like Monty Williams. I think if this was one of the like regular weekday 7-game slates, a Tuesday in November, late November, I think 6-1, we'd be like, oh my God, we're rostering Money all day long. But I think it's a little bit more worrisome here in the tournament, all things considered. So you've been the Tanjay captain, you and Balky. Expensive price, just kind of ran through there. What are you doing with him? And do you have any other, affinities for any players in this one?
I have a handful of thoughts about this game. I'll start with Tanjay. Just I think this is a good point for many of the games on this slate. It's a very unique slate, not only with the amount of games that we have, but just the competition level between teams. There's going to be a lot of potential blowouts, potential games that you think are going to blow out and end up close, games you think that might end up close and might blow out. You also have to create a story in your head for each game, how the game script's going to go. This is almost like an NFL DFS type thing, but you want to go into a game like a Montana-Wisconsin. And if you think Wisconsin's covering the spread, this is going to be a 20, 25-point game, then it's going to take me off somebody like Tanjay. They're not going to push him down the stretch. He might get his in the first half and then kind of shut it down. But if you think the game's going to be close, then you mentioned it. I mean, Montana is one of the worst defensive teams probably on the slate tomorrow. I mean, Wisconsin's scoring 70, 80 points against Big Ten opponents. What's going to stop them from going for 90 if this game is competitive? And on the other side, you'd have to say, well, what if this game's competitive and Wisconsin's going to score 80 or 90 points? Then you probably want to run back on Montana as well. So it's just kind of something that you want to be thinking about for all these games when you see the spread. Create a vision in your head of what the game's going to turn out being and kind of craft your lineup that way. You don't want to contradict yourself. So I do think that Wisconsin should win this handily. So I'm leaning much more towards the cheap forwards. I know Crowell, he projects well, you mentioned, but he kind of turns himself down in the game. You don't have to turn the projections down for him. He kind of just takes himself out of it. Nolan Winter is a really funny story. When I first started playing with you guys, I was a little delayed this year, didn't start till January. Nolan Winter was like all that. Everyone wanted to roster Nolan Winter. He was like the golden boy of DFS. The second I played him, it's like he disappeared for 2-3 months and almost became a running joke. But he's now morphed back into the player that I'm actually most interested in. I played him a ton in the Big Ten title game, and it was a shame. He only played like 19 minutes, but he took so many 3-point shots. They all looked like they were going right in. Didn't end up going in. Carter Gilmore got more minutes probably than he should have. But I have interest. Under 5K, Nolan Winter, I don't know what his ownership's going to be tomorrow. It's probably going to be minuscule. If he hits some of those threes, uses his size to his advantage. The thing I like about him is you're somewhat protected if the game blows out. He just has to play pretty well in the first half. Maybe he gets 15 to 20 points, gets a couple in the second. He's somebody I'm interested in a little bit more than Crowell. Crowell's more conservative. And on the Montana side, if you think the game's going to be competitive, I could get to a Monty Williams, a Malik Moore. Patterson, I like that call, though. Again, another cheap price tag. If he comes out and nails a couple threes, swipes a couple steals, he was very active in that game that you wish you played him. I think that was the Idaho semifinal. So there's a lot of options in this game. It's just you have to determine in your head what the outcome's going to be and play it that way. If you think it blows out, maybe go the cheaper options. If you think it's close, I could get to a Blackwell or a Tanjay and a Monty Williams.
Yeah, it's all about risk tolerance on this slate, and who has the higher risk tolerance, I think, is going to have an opportunity to really just end this slate completely. But there's going to be a lot of heartache as well. But yeah, Patterson was like a top 4 projection that day, and I was like, I don't know about this. And so I, of course, I edited it down a little bit and didn't use him. And of course, he puts up 20 in the first half because he had 4 steals. It's like, oh, the projection sheet showing out a little bit. So I'm gonna have to get some exposure somewhere. I can't make that mistake again. Certainly don't expect 40, but he's active, like I said.
No, sorry. He's the classic guy that you're watching the game because you played Monty Williams, and then you're just like, who is this guy just with all this usage? Like, get this guy off the court. but
Right.
but then he stands, at 4-1, I think he is. If he has one of those kind of games where he just comes off the bench and it's instant impact, like I could see it could pay off, especially on a 16-game slate. No one's going to be playing him.
No, and the big thing there will be minutes, because if he plays over 20, I do think he has a chance to pay off, especially in that garbage time area if it does get out of hand. He actually was a transfer from Sacramento State, and he was a dead-eye shooter in the Big Sky for this season as well. Seventh, shooting at 43% on about 82 attempts. So not a high volume guy because of his minutes, but when he does take them, he's hitting them. So if he can get a couple steals, hit a couple threes there, and during his first half stint, and then if it does pull away, maybe Wisconsin's up by 18-20 there. Last 5 minutes, Montana decides to just let Patterson do his thing. Those guys in garbage time can rack up quickly. So it's not the craziest thing in the world to play Austin Patterson at 1%. So we'll see. All right, let's move on to the next one here. We have a 1 versus 16, and the 1 versus 16s always seem like they'll never happen, right? And when they have the last two, it's been like, whoa, this is one where I would like. Those were shocking. The Virginia loss was shocking. The Purdue loss wasn't as shocking to me for whatever reason. This one would be real shocking with SIU versus Houston, but SIU has some dudes that play defense like maybe they are on Houston, so it'd be interesting. It's a 28.5-point spread, though. Large. Total of 126.5. Lower total as to be expected. Would be looking, even though it's low, I would be looking at the under here. The good news for Houston, Juwan Roberts is going to be available, and I don't know that he's going to play a ton of minutes. They don't need him to, but he's just such an important part of this team and the morale boost. Like, I know that the numbers and all that, and it's like, very hyper focused on this. There's no human emotion at all, but I'm sure you played sports when you were younger and throughout your life. And there's a huge mental aspect to playing, and having somebody who's your leader in all aspects missing time. His senior night, everybody was crying because he couldn't even play, and getting him back is just going to be a huge boost to Houston. I think they're just going to obviously dog walk SIU, but I think they're going to do it in such a fashion that's going to be like, damn, this team is ready. Because a lot of people are down on Houston right now. So this is going to be a one where I want some exposure. Typically, when we have a high major team playing a low major in these tournaments, we want to look more to the big men. We know guards win in March, but that's when the games are competitive, and later on in the Sweet 16 and beyond. These first two rounds, when we've got the disparities here in size and the way that teams play, we're going to look to the big men. But I don't think that we can play Juwan Roberts, and he's more, he floats around, does some Euro type stuff. That means JoJo Tugler has to be on our list. He's a little more expensive than I'd want him to be at 5'7". Obviously, there's some foul risk there. And then our guy, Javier Francis, who nobody would roster, the injuries that Houston had, nobody rostered Francis except for us. He got into major foul trouble against BYU and still put up 14 fantasy points in 13 minutes. So what could have been there? And then he played 29 against Arizona, and he put up 15. I was like, man, that was the time. You could have done so much more in that time. But against SIUE, I think Francis could actually have a really massive game. The problem is he's not 3-3, 3-4. He's 4-4 now, and he can do a lot of damage if he doesn't get that, those minutes and get that done. But I don't believe that Houston starters are going to play a ton. So that means Milos Uzan, LJ Cryer, Manny Sharp, those guys who are all in the mid 6K range. Like, if they're those prices in competitive games, we're going to have some interest there for sure. But not quite there with them in a 1 versus 16. That's not really going to look too competitive. And I don't believe SIUE has the profile of a team that will go crazy from beyond the arc and catch Houston sleeping. So Tugler, maybe some Milik Wilson, but Francis, I think, is a very sneaky look. And then some garbage time Terry Arsenault, who's down there at 380. He hasn't looked very good lately, but this is one of those games where I could see Terry playing 25 minutes and just being the garbage hero who puts up 20 in that last 8 or 9 minutes of the game. So you want some GPP exposure there to Terry Arsenault as well. What's your plan of attack here on the 1 versus 16? And I'll get into some SIUE stuff here in a minute too, but want to get your take on how this matchup suits you.
At least from the Houston side, I'm kind of in line with you. I'm mostly just targeting the cheap options. I think the game's going to be too out of hand. You can't target Roberts right now because he's expected to play, but there's just no reason to push him. Tugler, normally I would have some interest. He's just not really a high usage guy. He's more of a crash the glass, like get some peripherals, get some blocks. Surely he could rack up, 3-4 blocks, have a couple steals. He'll probably get there in the first half alone. I just worry a little bit about the second half if they start to give those guys a rest. Francis, you mentioned it. He played 29 minutes. I swear, if that guy played 29 minutes, you would almost put your life on it that he would eclipse 20 fantasy points, and he still wasn't able to. He cannot. I don't know the last time he's been above 20 fantasy points, but it seems like no matter what, this guy's locked in the 12 to 16 fantasy points, regardless of what he gets. So I'm a little hesitant there, especially with the price increase. We been playing him in the 3Ks when we were expecting him to get more minutes. So there's a little concern there. Arsenal is probably the player I'm most interested in just because he's 3.8. We've seen him have big games before, and the garbage time factor is real in this game. I expect him to be out there probably soaking up some big minutes in the second half. And we just know the upside is there because we've seen it. We've seen it against high major teams. So I would expect him to be able to have some success late. You only really need 16 points out of him to crush value. So Arsenal is really the only one that I circled, unless, of course, somehow you think this game's going to be a little bit more competitive. But with a 20-plus point spread, that's just not going to happen.
No, and like I said, this team, the SIUE doesn't profile as a dead-eye 3-point shooting team. They've got a guy in Brian Taylor who can shoot pretty well, but they're just not as a team gonna catch Houston flat-footed and make it a bunch of threes. They do have some dudes who are really interesting. Rayshawn Taylor, but he's priced like he's interesting. 30.1% shot rate, 30% usage rate. Like, he's their guy. Has a ridiculously high steal rate. He would actually fit quite well in this Houston program, believe it or not. And then they have their dead-eye 3-point shooter in Brian Taylor, who's 15th in the country at 46%. But then they have a bunch of guys who are probably just going to end up fouling and just using those fouls. And the big thing here for Tugler is if he doesn't get any of those nonsensical fouls trying to go for the highlight block, and he actually gets some substantial first half minutes, he does do enough on a per minute basis to pay off. He fouled out in that Arizona game, and that's why Francis ended up with so many more minutes. But as we know, Arizona has, they lost a bunch of big men in the transfer portal, but still have like 18 on the roster somehow, and they're very difficult down low. So it wasn't the best matchup for Francis. This would be, and you go through and look at their roster, who they're going to be playing at center. They have Arnis Sakinis, but he's kind of flat-footed, not a lot of athleticism. Ring Maleth, who's undersized. So there's some big-time upside for those front court options. And I am tempted to go back to Francis. I really am, but probably can't do that in the Mania. That would be a little bit too cute. But it wouldn't surprise me if multiple Houston bench pieces ended up paying off here. All right. Well, before we move on here, Ariel, this is my boy El Presidente of the Posh Alexander Club. Ariel goes way back. Love seeing that. Good to see you, Ariel. I think the blowout could be big enough minutes for Mercy Miller to get some decent time. Speaking of endless big men on Arizona, how about endless Suns for Master P? I don't know where he keeps getting all these kids. He's going to just, finding them off the street here. But yeah, Mercy Miller, maybe, I don't think that's one of those plays where it's just way too cute. If you're running multiples or you're doing the mini max, yeah, I think 2 or 3 on Mercy make a lot of sense. He's 3K. Maybe he gets that last 5-minute run and all he needs to do is hit a 3. Probably will get a steal, a couple of rebounds, and yeah, you're feeling pretty good. At a minimum, 3x potentially for Mercy Miller. You're going to be doing somersaults, cartwheels, the whole 9, because that's going to be enough on this slate for a guy at that 3K price point. Going to be risky though, because he might not even get those 5 minutes. But if this one gets out of hand so fast, yeah, he's one of their other guards. And if things were to get really nasty later in the tournament with injuries, fouls, they would have to go to him. You don't want him to be completely terrified. And this is where it kind of hurts them not having Ramon Walker, who's not great at all, but he's at least somewhat poised and been here before with Houston. All right. And then Scooter, my man Scott. Happy Bracket Mania Eve. Terrence Arsenault, buy stock now. Scooter is in the Mania as well. I know he's only here because he thinks I'm going to give him the secret sauce on Mania, but might be throwing you off, man. I'm not going to be giving you it all. All right, let's move on here. Alabama State, the play-in winner. What a shot. What a crazy start to the tournament. We'll be facing Auburn. It's a 32.5 point spread, total of 149.5. So give it to Alabama State. St. Francis, the team you're pretty familiar with because you're up in that area. And you kept saying, man, this team's just play. They keep winning and they're playing well, but they're not actually good. You kept saying, hey, watch out for that SWAC second half, and Alabama State did it. And that last play, that was nuts. They actually gave the assist to the inbounder, but technically should have gone to Madlock because it bounced off his hand and into the arms of Knox. It's like, I want my assist for Madlock. But what a way to start the tournament. But another, 1 versus 16, and one that like this would be the most shocking. Even those 1-16s before, like the Virginia one, like totally shocking. I couldn't even believe it. I thought I was dreaming. When the Purdue one happened, I wasn't actually all that shocked. Like I say that now, but I feel like Auburn losing to Alabama State, that would just be like a world ender for me. I don't know that we could continue another collegiate season if that happened. And at this point, I think Auburn is at 32.5 points. I don't like laying that kind of number, but I think Auburn might win by 50 here. Alabama State can't shoot threes very well. They tried against St. Francis. They turned it over a lot, especially lately. And I think the foul problems that they have are going to be magnified times a million here. So why don't you start us off on the Auburn-Alabama State game? Maybe this is a chance for us to use our guy, Tahad Pettiford, with some likely garbage time ahead.
I would love to be able to do that. I mean, he's certainly a player that profiles as a nice option here if you know he's going to get the minutes. I mean, when he gets 20-plus minutes, he's usually getting around that 20-plus fantasy points, which is what we're going to want from somebody at, I think he's at 5'3", if I'm looking at that, 5'6". So, yeah. I mean, he's certainly the most explosive scoring option that could see time in garbage time, because we saw when Bruce Pearl had his infamous comments on one of the post games about how his guards are super tough, let's just say. Pettiford was not a part of the rotation as much as he normally was in those games. It's almost as if he didn't want to go to him, but he certainly will go to him in this game. If the game's a 40, 50 point deficit at that point. So Pettiford, just on a per minute, fantasy point per minute basis, is the strongest option, who's also cheap, accounting for the blowout. Denver Jones at 4.3, little interest there. I'm sure he'll start. You might get there in the first half. Broom's a tough one because Broom should be able to score 40 fantasy points in the first half. It's just, will he be motivated to do it? Will they really just keep going down to him, or will they try to get into more of a flow and almost treat it like a walkthrough? And I'm not saying you're going to overlook an opponent like that. I just don't know if they need to push him. Similar to what I said with Tanjay and Wisconsin. If you think the game's going to blow out, is there really a need to push your star when you want to win 6 games to win a national championship? I'm sure he'll project pretty well just because of how good he is and how inferior the opponent is. But I don't have a specific Alabama State player I'm interested in. And we've seen them at least a couple games now. Madlock's the best option on the team. I just, at 6-1 against Auburn, how much is he going to do? I did a little tiny bit of research just based on last year. And I said, well, how are these 16 seeds doing? At least how are their starters doing in terms of production in these games, even when they blew out? And at least from just a brief research from last year, the 16 seeds were far less impacted statistically, their starting 5 rotational players, than the 1 seeds. So I could see Alabama State cheap players just, they might be a senior. The coach is just leaving them out there the entire time because it could be their final game of their career. So I'm sure there might be a diamond in the rough on Alabama State. I'm just not confident enough to pull the trigger there and highlight one specific player. So Pettiford's probably my top option in this game, simply because of how explosive he is, and he's pretty much protected either way. If it really blows out, he should get garbage time. If it's a comfortable blowout, he should still play a decent amount in the second half, in addition to his normal rotational minutes.
Yeah, and that 5.6 price will keep people away. If he was like 4.6 or even 5K, I think you'd see people just slam with the expectation that, hey, he's going to play not only in the first half, but he's going to get that time in the second half when it's out of hand, because they're going to want to get him built up in that confidence, because there's going to be a game down the line where Auburn's having trouble offensively. Broom's not having a good game. Can't really rely on Denver Jones offensively that much. He can do it, but where are you going to turn? Pettiford's going to have to step in and be that guy that creates shots for himself and facilitates a little bit. So you want to get him that confidence and shake out any potential nerves that a freshman might have. Now, I don't want to do too good because I don't want him to be a one and done as a dynasty owner of Todd Pettiford, but I definitely want to see him do well. So the 5-6 price is kind of a double-edged sword in that way, because I don't know that I want to pay that necessarily for a main lineup, but I also know it's going to keep everyone else away, and then I'd have him to myself. And I don't mind having a sub 5% owned Todd Pettiford, probably sub 2% owned. You do have Denver Jones there projecting the best because he's 4-3. And I think because of the lack of like truly slam dunk value on this particular slate, we'll see a pretty high ownership on Denver Jones. You got a sneak peek there because the sheet's been had to have mind of its own lately. Had popped Gonzaga on the screen, so you already know if a Huff starts, he's going to be the chalkiest player in the slate. You guys saw that. But Denver Jones at 4-3 will likely have a lot too, and especially the people who are just, addicted to having that. I got to get the cheap guys in. I got to put those pay ups in. I got to get at least 2 of them. Denver Jones just makes a lot of sense there. He doesn't need to do a whole lot. The problem with Denver Jones is he doesn't usually do a whole lot. And when you roster him, it's a little bit of a nerve-wracking experience, because if the shots are falling, great. But if they're not, he's just not going to get there fast enough. And there's a lot of empty minutes there for Denver. And if this game ends up out of hand by halftime, how much is he actually going to play in the second half? I tend not to worry about blowouts all that much compared to most people, but this is obviously a matchup where I do worry about that for him. So, but again, with a lower scoring slate anticipated, even if he hits 3x there, you're probably still okay. So in single entry, it might be a situation where we've got to really strongly consider Denver Jones, but I'm back to doing my normal, not worrying about what other people are rostering, because I don't want to play a bad player because everyone else is. Not saying Denver Jones is bad necessarily, but I want to get there on my own, not because the group is doing it. As far as the Alabama State side goes, probably a big fat no. Justivian Walker is there at 4K, but he's going to get into foul trouble. There's just no chance that he doesn't. So it's kind of a fake value there because he's not going to get enough minutes. I mean, you see him at 24-ish minutes. He's pretty close to 4x, but I'm not sure he'll even get there. It's going to be one of those deals where he gets it too early, third in the early second half, fourth at the 12-minute mark, and then fouls out at the under 8. Just don't roster him in your main, because that's exactly how it's going to go down. They do have some interesting options, CJ Hines, Samara Knox, those types, but yeah, I can't roster any of them. It is kind of interesting that Chaney Johnson is 4,400. We've seen when Auburn has been banged up and Chaney got those additional minutes in the middle part of the season, he got his price up to 7K, almost 8K at one point. He was unfadable for a stretch there. Now we're looking at him at 4.4 and 24, 25 minutes. I like him over Denver Jones, honestly, because he does more. I just have to be guaranteed that those minutes are there. And with Bruce Pearl, that's never a guarantee. All right, let's move on to the next one here. Get off these 116 matchups. McNeese State versus Clemson. Total of 133.5 currently. Clemson a 7.5-point favorite. When the bracket dropped, a part of me wanted to load up on McNeese State from a betting standpoint. But then I started remembering last year how I loaded up on McNeese State and I picked them against Gonzaga and relearned a lesson I already knew as a Husky fan, not to pick against Gonzaga at this time of year before the Sweet 16, and they absolutely obliterated McNeese State. This is a spot where I think McNeese State would be competitive and actually cover and have a real chance to kind of scare Clemson. But all the stuff that's going on with Will Wade to NC State and all this other chatter, and he's kind of just embracing it during his pressers, makes me concerned, because when these, and I'm not saying he's going to be like 1 foot out the door, he's not going to coach his guys up, he will, but when those coaches, we've seen it so many times where it's like the rumors are there that they're going to be leaving, the team duds out, the morale's a little bit lower, it just it's a really awkward situation for me. Now McNeese State is loaded with transfers and upper classmen transfers who aren't like dedicated to McNeese State like that, and probably don't actually care that Will Wade's going to go to NC State, because a lot of them are done after this year anyways. So it might not impact them the same way it would like a sophomore or freshman who's been there for a couple of years. Not that that happens that often in the NIL transfer portal era, but I think they'll be less impacted. I have to redo McNeese State's minutes. You see a lot of guys here off. So you have some cheapies here with McNeese State, and I think there are some very, there's some merit here to using them. Brandon Murray, for example, at 4K. I love me some Brandon Murray. Javon Garcia is very cheap at 5.7, but this Clemson team, they're good defensively with or without Dylan Hunter, and I just don't know that McNeese State's going to be all that trustworthy here because they also have a lot of different options. On name value alone, guys like Quadir Copeland, again, Javon Garcia, Sincere Parker, all these dudes can score and score well, but Clemson is a whole different animal, not necessarily a team they've seen. Kind of a bad matchup for them. I do worry about them a great deal. On the Clemson side, Mike brought up Chauncey Wiggins, not a name that I love talking about, but he is 3.9. He is going to be a corner stander, we know, but there's going to be a lot of threes taken against this McNeese State team. And at 3.9, if we can get him to get 2 or 3 of those down, he's definitely going to end up semi-optimal at that point. And he has been seeing his minutes go back up, especially with Dylan Hunter shelved for the season. It wasn't Jake Heidbreder who got to start in those minutes. It was Chauncey Wiggins. So what say you about this particular matchup?
Well, first of all, I probably should have mentioned this a little earlier. Just because this is a 16 game slate, I'm looking, but basically everything I've said so far has been from a GPP type lens. I've played a lot of cash this year, but I don't know if I'll play cash as much in the tournament just because the slates are larger and the player pools are bigger. I'm going to be focusing more on GPP. So Denver Jones for sure. Like you're playing cash or single entry, I have interest, even though he can be frustrating at times. But I'm mostly looking at this from a GPP angle. This game, though, Brandon Murray, I know I just mentioned it, but value is very hard to come by on this slate. I know Denver Jones provides a little bit of it, but I do have a little bit more interest in Brandon Murray. He is even cheaper than Denver Jones. But if you go through his game logs, though, there's brutal inconsistency. But that's the type of player that I'm fine playing at 4K in a GPP on a 16-game slate. You have to just look at this game and like I said before, just project whether you think McNeese will be able to keep this one close. I tend to think they will, simply because they were there last year. They got that experience. It wasn't a great outcome for them last year, but they're back. I think they kind of know what to expect this time around. The one concern maybe is just Will Wade kind of being out the door. And I wish that wasn't announced a couple days before the tournament, because now I'm thinking, who knows, maybe Clemson blows this one out. But Brandon Murray was the guy I circled on McNeese State. And I think Clemson has some decent options as well. I think Victor Locken is still at a palatable price where he has that upside where he can pay off, especially if Clemson just kind of manhandles them. I think McNeese isn't really, they're not like a big team. So I could see Locken kind of getting his there. Ian Shefflin just kind of does it all. With him, it's always just about how aggressive he is. If he's aggressive, he can go for 35, 40 points. If he facilitates and just gets peripherals, that's when you see some of his floor performances. Chase Hunter, I liked him better when he was cheaper the last couple slates, so I'm not sure I'll get there. But yeah, I mean, there's some options in this game that I have marginal interest in, but I think Murray, just for GPP, I'd be willing to take a stab at him at 4K because I think there's a little bit more upside and meat on the bone there for him.
Yeah, we've had a lot of success over the last week with Chase Hunter under 6K. It was actually surprising that he didn't have more ownership, I think, because a lot of people just see him as a guy that typically gets 3x whatever price he's at. But he, without Dylan Hunter, he really took over. And Dylan's not even that big of an offensive threat, but those extra minutes just went into his pool, and it took him to another level, which has caused his price to go to almost 7K. So definitely backing off there. One angle, there's many that Clemson has an advantage over, but one is the fact that teams have really had a lot of success, second and third and fourth opportunities against McNeese State. Defensive boards aren't really their forte. One thing that Victor Locken does well, aside from fouling a lot, is get on the offensive glass. Same thing for Ian Shefflin. I would expect both to have huge rebounding games, and you can see Locken at 6'4" projects damn near 30 points. at the 28-minute mark. If you reduce that to about 24-25 with the anticipation that maybe there's some foul trouble, still going to be a very strong play. And I do think he ends up being, believe it or not, a popular play because he is in that low 6K range, and you're talking about all these other pay-ups and guys that are in his range or above him at 7K that you're not as comfortable with. And then all of a sudden those fouls for lock-in don't seem quite as scary, especially not against this McNeese State team. So he's definitely a strong play that I would expect to see in a lot of survivor lineups, a lot of single entry lineups. He's definitely the guy in this game that I think you'll see a pretty big boost in ownership. As a GBP player, heavy GBP player like you are, this McNeese State team is nice because I don't think they'll get that same level of ownership, but you can just rotate through. Quadir Copeland at 5'6", played over 35 minutes as a starter last time out. Might we see Sincere Parker get unleashed for 25-plus minutes? Definitely a real possibility. He can fill it up in a hurry. And then, of course, Brandon Murray, who spent time in Ole Miss, LSU, Georgetown, everywhere. Has the talent. Big programs kept taking him. It just seems like he hasn't been able to get over the hump. But at 4K, Mike laughed at me last night, but he's definitely a value that I would consider to run in the main lineup, believe that or not. He's not starting, though, so a little bit of a downgrade there. As a starter, I might be more amped for him, but maybe this does get out of hand, or maybe McNeese State's just offensively challenged and Brandon Murray comes in and just chucks. That's a real possibility as well. All right, let's move on to the next one here. So I'm not on the McNeese State upset like I was last year, unfortunately. BYU versus VCU. BYU is a 2.5-point favorite, total of 146.5. Now, when I did my bracket on air on Monday, I was on the BYU side, but afterwards kind of internalized it, sat on it, chewed on it a little bit, and I started to kind of worry about that, and I've officially changed my answer to VCU. They're just defensively so much closer to Houston in the way that Houston was able to dominate BYU, not like, Iowa State when BYU had success against the Cyclones. So there's a lot of concern for me there with BYU, and I have a lot of adjustments to do here still. I wanted to put the projection screen up still like I do every show and give you guys that look, but still a lot of minutes edits to do. The guys are cheap on BYU. Trevin Nell's only 3.6. We had a Nell game 2 games ago. Richie Rich, my guy's under 7K. Actually has to be in consideration regardless of who they're playing. Igor Demin is 5'6". He might be a one and done. That's a really cheap price for him, although I feel like teams have solved him a little bit. So that's why he hasn't been as good. And then you have guys like Moat Mag at near min price. He's an excellent tournament play. We've hit on Mag's good games a few times this year. And then Dallin Hall down there at 4K, who's another guy who we've had some success with. You could even look at Fousseyni Traore as a GBP look because probably foul trouble coming for Keba Kaida. So a lot of cheap prices for BYU. So I like them in that regard because they give us salary savings. But I no longer like them to win this game as much as I thought I would. I am much higher on the VCU side. Max Shulga's a pretty nice price of 8K, very affordable. Joey Bam at 6'8". You can get him in there. He's an excellent tournament look. Jack Clark just tore it up. I'm a little hesitant to go there because of how well he played at 7K. I wonder if he'll have some ownership. So I'm lower on Clark there, and that price increase has brought him down the list a little bit, as you can see on the projection sheet there. So there's this very interesting spot here to target because I think the winner of this game could actually make a little bit of a run in the tourney, make some noise. That second round matchup looming with Wisconsin. If things break right, I think that we could see the winner of this game be a Sweet 16 squad. But as of now, I'm on VCU, and I do need to adjust Philip Russell because we'll put him at 20. He played way less minutes than we thought he was going to last game. He got those 2 threes right away, and it was like, man, his 8.5-point prop, that's in the bag. He's going to be a great play. It was like 40% owned on a shorter slate. Like, let's go. And then he just proceeded to play like 3 minutes the rest of the game. So leery to use him at 4-3. But if we knew he was going to play 30-plus minutes, he would be an absolute slam once again because he is good, just needs to be on the floor, can't do a lot from the bench. So what are you doing here with this one? Because BYU's been a team that I feel like we've done pretty well on compared to the rest of the industry.
I think this game had a lot of potential if you can target it correctly. And I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but you have to project the game script, how you think it's going to go in your head. If you think BYU is going to win the game, I could think of what North Carolina did to San Diego State last night. San Diego State's an extremely well-respected defense. I don't think they gave up anywhere near 80 points or above this year. I think last night was the first time. If you think VCU, even with the metrics, is maybe a little bit of a paper tiger defensively because they didn't play the same type of schedule as some of these other teams, then maybe BYU isn't frustrated by their defense as much. Maybe BYU puts up 70, 80 points. If that's the case, then you have to be thinking Richie Saunders at 6'9". He's somebody who was pushing 10K just a couple of weeks ago. If you think BYU will not struggle with VCU, or VCU won't have the type of success kind of holding down BYU, then I could go there. You could even go a little game stack with Demon as well, maybe throw in a Mawat Mag or one of the cheapies, and even run it back with Shulga. Because I think Shulga at 8K, it's not a great price. It's not something you're jumping out of your seat to play. But if you think this game ends up being in the 70s or 80s, not saying it will, but if you think that, there's a lot of potential in this game because you have a nice combination of an extremely reduced price on BYU's best player, in addition to a ton of great value options on their team. So, but if you think VCU is just that good of a defense, then again, I probably avoid it. I don't think there's anybody on VCU that really stands out to me in a major way. If we knew Russell was going to play a lot of minutes, he obviously would project well, and I'd go to him, but he just doesn't look the same last couple games. So it really just comes down to, do you think BYU will be able to handle VCU's defense, or do you think this will be a little bit of a grind it out type game? If you think it'll shoot out, there's a lot of good options. If you don't, then maybe I'd avoid.
That's why I flipped overnight on who I wanted to pick, because VCU can handle, obviously their preference would be to grind it out and work their defense, but they can handle an offensive game. They have the pieces. We just saw Jack Clark shoot very well. We know that Max Shulga can get it done. We've seen Russell. We've seen Zeb Jackson. Speaking of Zeb Jackson, Warren asked thoughts on Zeb Jackson in a pace-up spot. He played 29 minutes last game when Russell played less than 15. So, yeah, when Russell was out and missed time, Jackson was the one starting. We know Zeb's really good. Honestly, he's more of a complete player than Phil Russell. Russell's more offensive-minded in my eyes. But, yeah, if Jackson were to suddenly start in this one because there's something really going on with Russell, Jackson's definitely an intriguing look as well. But they can form to however this game plays out. If BYU pushes their pace, VCU can still handle that. They have the offensive weapons. It's one A-10 team that I think can compete with some of the higher majors here. And I'm a guy that really liked BYU throughout the season. Honestly, I warmed up to them a lot. At the beginning, I didn't. But Richie Sanders quickly became one of my guys, and they're never pulling ownership whatsoever, and I don't expect them to here either. So definitely a GBP looking game, but this is one too that feels like that one where it'll be a little ugly initially, but then the teams figure it out, and then we're seeing, trading baskets, and we're having overtime potential. You had that Chattanooga game go 1 million overtimes for you the other night. This one feels to me like one that could go multiple, and each team has the weapons to see that to fruition. So definitely some value to be had on BYU if you can get it right. And they're cheap enough to where if they brick, not totally, but if they brick like a 3X game, I think you can still survive. All right, Georgia versus Gonzaga, total of 150.5. Gonzaga is a 6.5 point favorite. And just to put it in perspective, because VCU, I think people think of VCU like grind it out. It's going to be a lower scoring game. Total is only 4 points less than Gonzaga. And I think a lot of people look at Gonzaga, Georgia, and think it's going to be more of an offensive mind game, at least partially. This is one where I so far or so heavily on Gonzaga to win and in the brackets and betting that it would make me nervous. If it was any other team besides Gonzaga, I'd be nervous because the whole world is on them. And Georgia's not a scrub team, right? They come from the SEC. They've got guys. They've got the one and done in Ace and Newell. They've got decent enough guards. But Gonzaga is just so good, man. In the first 2 rounds, especially 9 straight Sweet 16s, had to relearn that lesson not to pick against them. It doesn't make me nervous because I've got a lot invested in Houston there in that next round, and I don't want any bad stuff to happen to them. But man, Gonzaga is just absolutely crushing it. I'll have you take the lead on this game because there's a lot of playable options in this spot, I think, on both teams. And probably the chalkiest player on the slate, if he starts, and with the way tourney games are, we might not get those starters in time. But I think people are still just going to fire him in, especially after what he did. But of course, talking about Braden Huff, who's still priced under 5K. And we've seen in small spurts, Huff playing 10 minutes here, 12 minutes there. He was still putting up well over a fantasy point per minute. There were times he was paying off value against lesser tier WCC teams or in the non-con, where he's putting up 22 fantasy points in 13 minutes. So if you give him 35 like they did last game, holy moly, that's a slate breaker. Everyone will probably have him. This is the one play on the slate where I can definitively say, yeah, that guy's going to be 70% or more in single entry, high dollar survivor, all of that. That would be one where I'd say you probably have to use him in the survivor. While I play cash game, single entry a lot different than others, survivor is one where you kind of have to fall in line in those first few rounds because you just need to advance. You don't need to get you don't need to be a hero. But take it away here. Break this one down for us.
I'll let you do Georgia simply because Georgia's a team that I've mostly just ignored this entire season. And if I've played, I've gotten absolutely nothing right with this team. I have no feel for them whatsoever. So I don't want to pollute this live stream with any of my Georgia takes and lead people astray. But Gonzaga is a team I'm very familiar with. Whenever they're on a slate, I almost always want to play them, especially if the game's projected to be competitive. We know that blowout games for Gonzaga, you'll see in the game script or the game logs that Nembhard will sometimes have a dud game or so. That's usually when the game blows out. Anytime a game is projected to be competitive, I have instant interest in Nembhard at 8-2. You already talked about the Braden Huff situation. Of course, if we know he's going to start, it's almost a lock button play. I'll be intrigued to see what they do with him because I truly believe he started because St. Mary's really just abused them down low with their bigs. And they were using Wessels and Saxon kind of together in that second matchup against Gonzaga that I think clinched the WCC regular season. I think that was almost a response to what had happened the previous game, starting Braden Huff in that WCC conference championship game. And it worked out. Now, Georgia has a Newell down low. So it's possible that Mark Few will say, let's just ride the hot hand. Let's go with Huff again. He did a great job neutralizing St. Mary's bigs a bit. So, I think this game is kind of in the middle of the slate, correct? Kind of an afternoon game. So we'll have to at least check the starting lineup. If Ben Gregg starts for whatever reason, I'd have heavy interest there. I even have a little interest in Ben Gregg regardless, just for GPP. Because we know if Huff is starting, the entire world's on him, and nobody's on Ben Gregg. Ben Gregg, I think he's at 4-1, if I'm not mistaken. And Ben Gregg is a player who has had massive games before. I really think that Gregg was almost like the glue guy of this team. He just did all the little things. He could rack up peripherals. He could score a little bit. And the potential's there. It's just a matter of how many minutes he's going to get. And if he's only going to play 11 or 12 minutes, I mean, there's just no value. So that's a situation to monitor. But Nembhard, a little bit of interest because we know this game could go down the wire, even though I do have Gonzaga winning. Graham EK, same thing. I mean, they're not advantageous prices to the point where we have to be forcing them in. But it really comes down to the forwards. If Huff's starting, probably just locking him in. I might throw Ben Gregg in some alt lineups simply because he'll have no ownership. If you are down to a last spot in and you have enough for Nembhard or EK, I'm fine with that as well. Gonzaga is just such an elite offense at this point. I think even against a tough Georgia defense, they'll be able to put up enough points. But I'll let you take care of Georgia because I just have no feel for that team whatsoever.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of Greg there, we have a tendency as a group, as the industry itself, to be a little fickle, and we live in a world in all facets, not just sports, of what have you done for me lately. It's easy to forget that Ben Gregg, mid-January to like early February, he was throwing down 30 plus fantasy points with no doubt. And it got to a point where his price got to 8K. Couldn't use him at 8.4, 8.5 because it was a little uncomfortable, but he was throwing down 31. Against Washington State, 31.5. Against Oregon State, 43. 39 against Santa Clara, 39 against Portland. Like, he had a 4 or 5 game stretch where he was just eating teams up. And then suddenly his minutes went away and they just no longer played him. But they did against San Francisco because there's some physicality on San Francisco. Granted, they were beat up, right? 29 minutes on March 1st against San Fran, 23 points, 8 rebounds. He puts up 35. So there's such a huge bit of leverage there because if Greg were to, like, because Huff's not above getting into foul trouble. Even if he starts, there's no guarantee that Huff doesn't pick up too. Going against Asa Newell and those driving Georgia guards, foul trouble is a very real possibility, and for Greg too. But let's say that Huff, in that first 5-minute stretch at 90% ownership, picks up those 2 fouls. Ben Gregg's coming in, and if Ben Gregg sees over 20 minutes, he's paying off 4-1. I can just about guarantee that. Now, he doesn't have the rates that Huff does. Like, Huff's rates are stupid. 34% shot rate, 26.4% usage rate, obviously in smaller spurts. He does have a combined rebounding rate over 20%, a block rate of 4.5%, but he has that fouls drawn rate of 3.5, which is nice, but also the fouls called rate of 4.6. And then you look at Ben Gregg, top 15 offensive rating in the country because a lot of his stuff comes in the paint. Doesn't have the same level. His usage rate and shot rates around 19%, but he does have strong stocks rates as well. Can pass a little bit. He does shoot the 3. He's not particularly great at it, 27%, but he has a volume with 70 of them. So some multifaceted ability there for Ben Gregg. He's not a scrub. And I think people have quickly forgotten that. And we're all going to be, how many times in DFS, like, throw the numbers out the window, throw the analytics for a minute, and just how many times in DFS where, man, this guy in the last game, he went nuts. He's cheap. He's going to start. Like, everybody has, you got to play this guy. He's so good. And then the dude that was playing before him at, a fraction of the ownership comes in and just absolutely decimates. And everybody does the hindsight thing. Why didn't I use him? Like, we see that all the time. We're pretty good about not doing the hindsight thing there because we try to anticipate these things that happen, especially as GBP faceted players, especially you being such a heavy GBP player. So, yeah, I like the Ben Gregg call out because I do think people have forgotten that he's pretty good. And he can put up a big number very quickly. And foul trouble can and will happen. Greg also has a pretty high foul rate at times, but that's okay. Like Nemhart, like Battle, like Graham Ike, all these guys, they're not priority plays. They're what I like to call luxury plays. But yeah, Gonzaga Mini, certainly there's worse things in the world than that. All right, moving on to the next one here. We're just past the halfway point, so we'll kick it into high gear here. Game number 9, Wofford versus Tennessee. It's a total of 133.5. Tennessee is an 18.5 point favorite. I guess I didn't get ahead of myself here. Let me pull up Georgia real quick before I got talking about Ben Gregg. On the Georgia side, I don't want any Asa Newell because I do worry about his inexperience in this situation going up against a team like Gonzaga. He's also not that cheap at 8K, and I'd say Silas Demery is also not cheap enough at 8-1 to really use. The player that we've been seeing is Tyron Lawrence. Even though he's not starting and coming off the bench, we've seen him get a ton of ownership, and perhaps people will look that way again just because they know, hey, the minutes are there off the bench, and at least we know he can produce. One interesting look here is Dakota LaFew at 3.9. Would be a fraction of that ownership that Lawrence might get, but he has played 24 plus minutes in 4 of his last 5, and he's taken a ton of threes in 3 of those last 4. That's his game. He does rebound a little bit. Had a 14-point outing against Vanderbilt, 14 real, I should say, 11 real against Texas. Like at 3.9, 14 real, like we're feeling pretty damn good about that. So another kind of GP-ish type of look there with Dakota LaFew. But other than that, I don't have a lot on Georgia. The prices of guys like Blue Cane at 6.4, just can't use them there. All right, moving back over to Tennessee and Wofford. Should be a blowout. Rick Barnes should be able to take care of business. We want to use some Tennessee guys, but we're seeing some real tough outings here lately for Igor Milicic, who is 5K. Looks a little bit, and he was good at Charlotte, so I'm going to come off derogatory here, and I don't mean it to, but he's looking like the Charlotte version of Igor Milicic, who was good, but not SEC good and or great. he really got stuffed in the locker against Auburn, and he was even worse against Florida. Now, he's had some illnesses, some minor injuries. He's had some ailments that are going around, and so he hasn't been 100% healthy. But he does have 2 out of his last 5 games in his logs over 24 fantasy points at this 5K price. Against Wofford, he should be able to rebound pretty well. Got to stay out of the foul trouble there. And I am still worried about, what the extent of, everybody at this point in the season is banged up, bruises, cuts, whatever. But I do worry about that because he's looked brutal. Watching the entirety of the SEC tournament, because the first day of that was really especially good. I just came away wondering what the hell was going on with Igor. Similar to that game against Oklahoma with Amari Williams that I've referenced several times over the last couple of days. Wofford does have a really good rebounding team at their level, but the athletes and the physicality of the Vols is definitely a different animal here. But I do worry about Igor just getting stupid fouls. I do believe he's going to be super high owned in the Survivor and all single entry because of that price. And people are going to notice that and just say, well, it's a buy low opportunity. I like buy low opportunities as much as the next guy. But if you're running mostly tournament action, I think Igor Milicic is a pretty bad play overall. Just because at high ownership, the bust potential is still quite heavy. Wofford's not a scrub team. I think a lot of people will just look at Wofford and write them off. I think they can and will hold their own for a bit. They will eventually get worn down. That's just the nature of this matchup and how it's going to play out. But I think there's some trouble here in paradise for Igor Milicic. Unless you're going to tell me he's going to play 30-plus minutes. And if he is, then yeah, at 5K, it's a silly price. I think you're going to want to play one of Milicic or Felix Okpara. Okpara there at 5.2, likely be lower owned because even when given the minutes, he hasn't had the upside that Igor has, but his floor has been a lot safer. And I do think that might be the theme of this slate, trying to backload and front load as much safety in your lineups as you can and take way less risks. Because in this first day of the tournament, especially in that Survivor, it's just not necessary to take those risks. We'll get into Wofford here, a little bit of a deep cut, but I want to get your take to start off with Igor Milicic and of course, anybody else on the Vols that you might be looking at here.
Yeah, Milicic is one of those plays where single entry or cash, probably going there just because, like you said, buy low opportunity. His usage rate and his fantasy points per minutes number are probably much higher than Okpara's. So I'd even be willing to not necessarily lock button him because in GPPs, you're going to want some form of leverage. If he's going to be high owned and, he has another dud game, then that's really just going to ruin your afternoon seeing that. There's a Kai Ziegler at 8.3. If you assume Tennessee is just going to rout them and score a lot of points in this game, and Wofford's defense isn't going to provide much resistance, Ziegler should just rack up, close to 10 assists. If he can, he might even get one of those kind of like almost like Elliot Cadeau last night. I think he had 9 points, 12 assists. You could get a game like that from Ziegler where he's not really forced to score, but Tennessee's just putting the ball in the hoop every possession for a while and racking up the assists. I'm sure he'll get some steals too. Sure that Wofford hasn't seen a defender like him in the backcourt all season. So I have a little bit of interest there. 8.3 is even a tad cheaper than what we've seen him probably on average since like January. But yeah, Milicic, it's a tough one to click on unless it's single entry or cash. He's going to draw a lot of ownership just because of the price. People are going to see his averages and they're just going to kind of lock him in. I'm still a little undecided about that. So Ziegler's the one that catches my eye a little bit. And then Wofford, I've mostly crossed off the list. I even wrote blah in my notes. Like when I was looking through them, that was the only thing I saw was blah. There wasn't really anyone who stood out. I mean, you could go to a Dylan Bailey perhaps, but there wasn't really anything. Maybe I'm missing something, but I wasn't really too interested in Wofford. It's a tough matchup for them as well.
Yeah, no, they've got good players. Don't get me wrong. Corey Tripp, Kyler Filowich, Dylan Bailey, as you mentioned. Jackson Civilis had a really big game that the sheet had actually nailed. Didn't end up using him because another one of those players was like, I don't know about that, but he played really well. They've got guys, but it's a lot different playing in the Southern which has some good players and some good teams. Furman, we saw how great that game was. But Tennessee's a whole different animal. And Ricky Barnes has had his struggles, right? Like, has had 2 Elite Eights in the last 5-6 years. So that's big. But before that, it's, you had to go to the early 2000s for anything beyond a second round, exit. But they take care of business in the first round, and they definitely should here against Wofford. So the big decision there is if you can trust yourself and him with Igor Milicic. But it is one of those worrisome fates there for me, because even if he wasn't projecting to be super highly owned, I think I'd still be inclined to use him, just because, how much does he really have to do to pay off that price against this Wofford team? But I do worry that the rebounding number might be lower than what people think. So I might be looking at some rebounding unders for Igor, just because if they're super high, if they're like 8 or 9, they probably won't be, but just something to kind of be aware of. I do like Akpara just from a leverage standpoint. And then we saw Jordan Gainey. He's likely too expensive at 6'3" to use. But if any point this tournament the Vols have trouble scoring, or Chaz Lanier is making the donkiest decisions and getting into foul trouble, Gainey's going to come in and play 30-plus minutes and have the Dalton Connect role in the offense. That was quite clear to me in the last few games there. Granted, they didn't win, but Gainey he's here for it. He is a really gifted scorer, and I think he's going to be a big part of the tournament run. If they make a deep run, Gainey is going to be a big reason for it. Lanier and Zeigler, of course, too, but I think Gainey is kind of the X factor at this point. All right, we will move right on to the next one here. Arkansas versus Kansas, legendary coaching matchup. Kansas 5.5-point favorites, total of 145.5. Bill Self versus John Calipari. This is one I mentioned in Mike last night, and I still feel this way. If these were like 2 newer coaches, did not not have that name value, and just looking at the rosters and the way they played, I would honestly just be picking Arkansas to advance, and I'd be betting them as well. And I still kind of like Arkansas, but when I can't get over the hump with the coaching matchup, as bad as Kansas has looked, and Bill Self, I don't think the game has passed him by any means. But it's a lot different with the NIL era here, and he hasn't quite figured it out. But he's still a fantastic coach when it comes to on the court stuff. And John Calipari is stuck in an archaic, 30 years ago basketball that he just refuses to change. So it makes me really worried about Arkansas as a whole. But talent-wise, I think the Arkansas should actually win, but I don't know that their coach is going to allow it, as funny and weird as that sounds. So what do you think about this matchup?
Yeah, it's an intriguing matchup. I think just that whole bottom of that quadrant there, you have Bill Self going up against John Calipari, and the winner's probably facing Rick Pitino. I mean, it's an incredible storyline there with the powerhouse coaches we have at the bottom of that bracket. In terms of the game, I probably trust Kansas more as well. I think Kansas actually looked pretty solid in the Big 12 tournament. I know UCF gave them a little bit of a scare late. They were kind of in control of that game. They just looked a little bit more competitive, especially on a neutral floor, because we know what they do at home. But on a neutral floor, they looked like they rounded into a little bit of form. We know Arkansas is an extremely volatile team. I don't know what to expect with Arkansas with Boogie Flan. I think he's supposed to return, but Tiero's supposed to be out. So I don't know what that's going to do to the team if Flan comes back. They seem to kind of find an extra gear with your favorite 2 forwards, playing them together in the lineup, Trevon Brazile and Jonas Adu. So I don't know if a shakeup in the lineup is going to make things a little difficult for Arkansas to kind of readjust. I think Kansas is just kind of, they have their 5 guys pretty much, and whichever value guard has a good game on that specific day. So I'm a little worried. I almost wish Fland was out, just so I don't think I'm playing him in DFS anyway, but just would have been nice to just completely cross him off the list. So it just really comes down. It's worked. And the one time I finally caved and played the 2 Arkansas forwards together, had one of my biggest days of the year. I don't know if I'm doing that this time around. The prices just keep coming up. I'd be interested to get your thought. For the game, it's a very intriguing game, just DFS aside. But in terms of DFS, I mean, Brazil and Adu, like, are you going to play that combo? Zeke Mayo, I think, is still a good price for Kansas. Hunter Dickinson, probably raw point wise, will be okay. I'm not going to pay $10K for him. KJ Adams, another one. Raw points wise, he's not going to kill you. Probably not going to win you anything either. I'm done trying to guess which guard off the bench or in the starting lineup does anything for Kansas. I mean, AJ Storrs looked better of late. David Coit's had some big games. Rylan Griffin, when he started and actually stayed on the floor, has been solid. It's just a lot of question marks in this game between these two teams. So I don't have anybody that I'm slamming right now, unless you're going to be slamming the two forwards again.
I'm not sure, but real quick, RPS Steve Boynton in the house says, "What's up? Good luck tomorrow. You too, my man. You too. Good to see you. Good to see you." Watched their bracket breakdown last night, and I was super excited. We'll talk about it here later, but he is on Memphis with us, and it seems like everybody in the world is on Colorado State. And I was happy to see Steve there, very smart guy, on Memphis with me. So very happy there. Yeah, man, it took forever for you to get there. And then when you did, which the hilarious part was, like, I got nervous about Brazil with Idu because I'd done it like 4 games in a row and it just kept working, right? And even when one got into foul trouble, they together, they just obliterated like 5x plus their salary combined. So once we like put it that way to you, I think you kind of been like, you know what, this is what I need to do. But then I got skittish of it and I ended up playing, what was it, Billy Richmond with Brazil, which also worked. You could have just played all 3.
You could have played all 3 of them somehow.
And yeah, they've looked really good, really, really good. But I the Flan thing, man, like I don't even know what to put on him, because right now I put 15 minutes on him, which is probably just not going to be right at all. But what do I do? I don't think he jumps right into 30 minutes, and I don't think he only plays 5. So I had to take a lot of minutes to get it down to 200 away from guys that deserve the minutes. Billy Richmond, Carter Knox has been pretty solid, and then I'd like bring down Wagner, and probably John L. Davis going to lose a bunch of minutes as well there, because I do worry that Calipari would be like, well, this is my guy. I got to keep my NBA streak going. I got another NBA player under my belt, so I got to play Boogie Flan that 30 minutes. And I don't think he will play 30, but I honestly, this game is one of the worst on the slate and the worst of the first round. There's only one other game on this slate where I feel kind of bad about like this, and it's Marquette, New Mexico, just because I'm not confident in who to pick to win that game. I know a lot of people are down on New Mexico, but I feel like either way, I just don't have a confident answer for that one. And I feel that way with this game, although I think Kansas wins, just as an overhaul from the DFS slate. So this is one game on the slate where I'm probably just staying away from. There are players in this game I love. Flory Badunga, brand favorite. Like, just if he, if there was no Adams Dickinson around, I wouldn't even give a damn who they're playing. Like Badunga, 30 minutes, I'm just paying any price for him. We're not going to get that, unfortunately. And I do 6-2 now. Brazil 7-3 now. You see Brazil still projecting over 4x there with the expected minutes, and IDU's pretty close because in their big minute roles they've been absolutely crushing. But they're pretty heavy prices there. And Zvonimir Ivicevic is still not well. You see, I've kind of pushed his minutes down all the way down to about 17, 18, and that might even be too much. So it's really hard to peg this Arkansas team right now, because I think that the disruption, it's going to be more of a disruption, like you said, with Flan, than it is a good thing. And actually, speaking of Steve being there, I believe it was him on their show last night, made a good point that like Janelle Davis was just total trash for most of the time Boogie Flan played. And he's right. I mean, we looked at it and we're like, man, Davis was the guy. Even coming out of the transfer portal, we all looked at him instead of Elijah Martin, and Martin's been the more productive of the two. But lately, without Flan, Davis has looked more like his Final Four Florida Atlantic self, and that's clearly got to be because there's no Flan being forced down his throat. So I think Steve made a good point there, and it's right. So I'm just skittish on this entire team and this entire game. I'm not playing anyone in Kansas. We did have a shit ton of good luck with Zeke Mayo over the last couple of games when he was priced way too low, and people kind of played him that first game, but they didn't continue on with it. And he's still pretty cheap at 7K. I do think he's into a nice little groove right now. And since that weird Twitter stuff happened and people saying awful things to him, it took it on the chin and kind of probably used it as some sort of motivation. He's been really good. And obviously, they're probably their best scorer, even more so than Hunter Dickinson. Perimeter, yes, but I think overall, like arguably the guy that when you need a bucket, you're looking to Mayo. You're not necessarily looking at Dickinson because Hunter Dickinson, whatever. We don't need to get into that. So I do like Mayo. I do like Brazil, but this is a game that I'm probably staying away from. And it pains me because it's been like a month, maybe a month and a half, to where the double Arkansas forward has not worked. Like it's just been working every time, regardless of opponent. All right, let's move on here to the next game. Too much Arkansas. This is a fun one. Yale versus Texas A&M. Total of 139.5. Kind of feel like the over might be in play there. And Texas A&M is an 8.5-point favorite. Now, I like Yale to win this game outright. I did pick them in my bracket. 2 for 2 going from last year with the surprising, stunning, shocking win over Auburn. Now they're getting a Texas A&M team. Bez and Bang. Honestly, I feel like he's going to have Wade Taylor in hell for 40 minutes. I know there are others out there that think Wade Taylor is going to put up a huge scoring number, and he might. But I think Bang's defense and overall Yale's perimeter defense is going to give him some trouble. I think Zurich Phelps might be the guy that has to kind of revert back and try to find his SMU self and score some buckets here. But I really like this Yale team. Why don't you kick us off here with some of the plays that you might be looking at or who you prefer in this one initially?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of just agree with what you said there. I mean, Wade Taylor normally would stick out, but if he's going to be, locked down by Mbang for a little while or for the entire game even, Zurich Phelps is kind of a sneaky option at times. If you look at his game logs, it doesn't blow you away, but at his price point, if the offense is going to flow through him more just naturally because Taylor's being blanketed by his defender, it's an intriguing GPP play. The rest of Texas Tech, other than Manny Obaseki, if he's in the starting lineup or if he's going to get a lot of minutes, he's very active. I think he's at 4-1. But Wade Taylor, it's kind of like you just have to make a decision whether you said some people are in the camp that he's going to have a massive game. Others think he might be locked down a little bit. You just kind of have to make a decision on what you're comfortable with there. And if you're not comfortable with Taylor, then pivoting to Phelps isn't really a bad idea. I don't know if I'll do it. I do also like Texas A&M to win this game. I have Texas A&M going pretty far in some brackets too. So this is a game we might have extreme interest in real life. On the Yale side, I mean, I might butcher his name, Pulkatitis, however you say it. I mean, he's a gamer. I mean, he's just a dead eye shooter. And, I go back to last year, Oakland with Golke. Just those kind of guys can thrive in these tournament atmospheres where they're feeding off the crowd and the upset. I could see him just, pouring in a bunch of threes. So he'd probably be my top option just because I think he's at 6'9". His price tag, I think.
Yep.
Or somewhere around there. Yeah. So, I mean, he's interesting. I like the dead eye shooters sometimes from the underdogs if they get hot, like a Golke last year. But Yale's a team, again, I unfortunately I've watched so much college basketball this year. I don't have a great feel for Yale. So I kind of just was gravitated towards the volume shooter.
Yeah, no, I like this Yale. Ivy League teams in general, and definitely been Yale. Like you can go back a decade and a half and found some Yale teams that didn't always win, but they gave teams a really difficult time in the first round. They pushed Baylor a couple of years ago as well. Pulakidis, I thought it was Pulakidis, but I did a profile on him on our YouTube shorts this morning. Pulakidis. It's a different one, but yeah, he's awesome. He's even better than last year. And last year, against Auburn, what he hit 7-8 threes. I mean, he was the big reason why they were able to advance. This is a really, really good spot for him, I think, against the Aggies. I know, interior wise, obviously the Aggies are going to have a huge advantage, on the glass, and they have endless bodies that they can send. And I think there'll be a level of physicality down low that's really going to bother a guy like Nick Townsend and Casey Simmons when he goes down there. And that's going to be the advantage they have. And Yale is going to have a prolonged game of successful 3-point shooting. And if they go cold at any point, then yeah, that's going to be tough for them to really pull this off. But man, Pulakidis has the green light at any time, and he doesn't really need much, a half inch, a quarter inch of space, and he's firing. And he's taken, Mike and I were talking about this last night and mentioned maybe he's just taking, because he's shooting about 39%, which isn't like a dead eye, But you look back and see he's taking so many contested threes and just nailing them with somebody in his face. He lives for this moment. I'm really excited about this game, and definitely going to be one that I have on my main screen that I'm watching a lot. I do like him. I think he's pretty close to a main piece for me. The projections don't necessarily agree. He's just under, right around 26, 27 fantasy points, puts him at 3.8. But again, we're not going to need, at least I don't think we're going to need a bunch of 5, 6, 7x returns on the slate. I think there's going to be so many bricks that if he puts up close to 4, I think that's going to get us through. So I really like him. Bang, a little more expensive at 7.5, but he's got more to his game. A little more nervous there because of the defensive energy that he's going to exert, but he's been doing that his whole career. Defensive player of the year in the Ivy. Like, this is what he does. You see, he projects extremely well at the moment. And then Nick Townsend, a little more expensive at 7.1. I don't love him against the Texas A&M Aggies front court, but definitely a viable look. You have some value there. Samson Allerton at 4.6. It's okay. Isaac Seliscar also under 5K. Both of them project decently, but I don't think I would be pulling the trigger on either in a main lineup more so than just Pulakidis or going up to Mbang. Wade Taylor at 7.8. Like, coming into the season when Wade Taylor, after the first maybe 2 weeks, when Taylor's price dropped drastically and he was under 8K, it was like, man, just keep rolling him out there, because last year's Wade Taylor, the last 2 months of the season, we were gladly playing 9K plus without batting an eye. And then it soon became apparent that it's not quite the same guy. And at first I thought, well, the appearance of Zurich Phelps, who's so much different than Boots Radford, needs the ball in his hands. It's like it's impacting Wade Taylor negatively. And both of those guys' offense took a hit, and clearly that had to be at least part of it. And then when Wen went down, Phelps got hurt or had to miss a game, Taylor would take over. Taylor had to miss a game or got hurt, like Phelps would take over. So it's kind of clear to me that was the case. Phelps is a very intriguing price at 6.6. Definitely have some interest there. I'm not using any of the Aggies front court players. We've done that, been there, done that months ago. Haven't really gone back to it. Henry Coleman's playing well, but I can't imagine playing him in a main lineup right now. I just can't. I like Pharrell Payne a lot as an actual basketball player, but the minutes spotty. And you mentioned Manny O. Again, another player like Wade Taylor. Like last year, towards the last 2 weeks of the season, I felt like Aggie stacks were all I was playing, and that was Boots Radford, Wade Taylor, and Manny O. And they all paid off every single time. So it's a bit of a weird feeling, and I had to retrain myself that, hey, this is not the same guys anymore. However, when Manny's gotten those looks, when Wade Taylor went down and Manny got the start, there was a showdown slate. I believe it was in early to mid-December. News kind of came out late. A lot of people missed it. We don't normally play showdowns, but that was when we did. Manny was like 8% or something on the showdown, and he put up a huge number. Gets those minutes, absolutely. And look what he did against Texas, right? 21 minutes, put up a monster number before fouling out, 30.5. So maybe late season Manny O is back. And if that's the case at 4.1, he could be the play that wins somebody $25,000. Because I think people will be gun shy and skittish to use him. But clearly, if the minutes are there, he's going to have the upside, especially against these Yale guys. He's a little out of control at times, which could be problematic in this spot. But I do like him a fair amount in GPPs. All right, let's go into the chat here right quick. Warren says, I've been playing 3-point shooters versus AM for the last 2 months or so, which makes me kind of like Pulakidis. Yeah, he's a dude. He is a dude. Profiled Yale as a bracket buster. Like I clearly like Yale. All right, moving on. We have Drake versus Missouri. Total of 132.5. Missouri is 6.5-point favorite. I know Drake is a trendier upset pick, which is fine. This was one that I felt like I was picking against the public because I actually feel like Missouri should take care of business here. And I got that confirmation last night, at least from Mike, who kind of agreed with me and felt the same. Missouri just has all these bodies that they're just going to throw out there. Drake has, 2 or 3 guys that are going to play 39, 40 minutes the entire game. And Missouri's just going to be able to play that level of physicality because if they get into foul trouble, they'll just bring that next sub in, next man up. They have so many bodies to throw at you. And they're not scrub bodies either. I know that on first glance, it might seem that way, but when you really dig into the past of some of these transfers that they got, Jacob Cruz, who was really strong as a mid-major player last year. We know Marquise Warwick was a Horizon League legend in for years. Like, they've got some really quality pieces on their bench that can pop off at any time. They don't really allow them to, but when guys are struggling, like Trent Pierce went through a cold streak, Tamar Bates went through a cold streak, Anthony Robinson's fouling all the time. Like, they've had to go to those guys and use them. And then when Mark Mitchell was banged up and had to miss, they've got those guys to be able to turn to. And that's my worry for Drake. I think that, Bennett Sturts is going to do his thing to a degree, but I feel like there's going to be a ton of fouls on the other Drake pieces. And I think they're just going to get worn down. When you're able to throw fresh, that's the thing with High Point and over Purdue. I kind of feel like that they just have the ability to wear them down. When you're constantly throwing fresh bodies at someone, it's just going to get demoralizing to a point. So I do think Missouri wins here. Not taking like 6.5. That feels like a little bit too much. Might like Drake on that side, but I do think Missouri wins this one outright and does advance. And we have some cheap options we can look at here. Anthony Robinson is the one that sticks out the most at 4.9. We know if he can avoid fouling, stay on the court, and play 20+ minutes, he's most likely paying this price off. He's going to rack up steals. He's going to grab some boards. He can score a little bit. Just a super active player. Needs to, over the summer, really figure out how to defend without reaching and how to, I don't know, not bite on pump fake so much. But he's great. He has a lot of potential at 4.9. Might stop short of saying he's a survivor / mania / single entry play, but he's probably my favorite Missouri play when you look at prices alone. I do probably pull back off of Tamar Bates. He had been a chalkier option the last couple of slates because he got so cheap. Now at 5K, Mark Mitchell's presence around there. If Bates gets cold, they'll go to the next guy. He took 20+ shots in his last 2 games, so at 30 actually. I don't know if that shot volume is going to continue here, especially if Mitchell plays and Caleb Grill. A Caleb Grill game is looming somewhere. We haven't really seen a Caleb Grill explosion here for about 2 weeks. So watch out for Caleb Grill. You roster one of these Missouri guys, Grill drops a 35, 40, and then it's curtains. So he's a little pricey for me at 6.2. And then you've got guys like Josh Gray, who did spot start at 3.4 and various options there. Tony Perkins is priced at 5.2. I do think Perkins has figured a few things out. He looked really good in the SEC tourney there for a couple of games. Have some interest at 5.2 for him. I think he's going to have to play a lot over 30 minutes, and the shot volume might not always be there, but I think he's going to facilitate very well and be the primary creator in that regard. So I have a lot of interest in him at 5.2. And then on the Drake side, Bennett Sturts is going to be too spendy for me. Drake is just this game is kind of a write-off for fantasy purposes for me, just because the lack of possessions or perceived possessions. Drake is just so content milking the clock all the way down to 3, 2, 1, just done every possession. So it's going to really kill that game, and that's how they've been able to be so successful, right? So I don't want to get too involved in this game, especially with Sturts, because I don't feel like there's enough possessions there. The cheap Missouri guys is one thing, but paying up over 9K for Sturts on a slate where we're already pretty hard up for value, don't think that's in the cards. There is some GPP looks here, guys like Tavion Banks, who have been interesting. We had that really good game 3 weeks ago from Isaiah Howard. It's been awful since, but he's got some pop. So there's some intrigue here to a degree, but for the most part, this is a game on such a large slate I don't think I'm going to get too involved in. Probably if you're breaking it down and playing like the 4-game afternoon, the 8-game night, like the smaller subsets, then you can get a little bit more involved with this one. But otherwise, I think it's probably a mistake to be playing too much from this one, unless you want to take that shot on Anthony Robinson. Do you have anything you want to add for this one?
Not too much. I mean, Drake, the funny thing about Drake is they lead the nation by a wide margin in made field goals with the shot clock under 5 seconds. So 50 more shots that they've made. They just they're I don't know how they've done it, because it's not a sustainable way to play. They're just basically, they give the ball to Sturts. He dribbles around with 5 seconds left on the shot clock. He either passes to somebody who chucks up a shot, or he takes some off balance looking shot, or he drives and gets fouled. It's just not a sustainable way to play. And when you're limiting the amount of possessions too, you're keeping the game close naturally just by, shrinking the number of possessions down. I think because of that, I agree with you. Sturtz is a player who I absolutely love. Drake is a team I absolutely love. I would love to pick them in this game, but he's too spendy. The rest of the options, like I said, it's just give the ball to Sturtz and let him work. There's really nobody else on this team generating big enough usage to interest me. And then Missouri, there's just so many guys. Missouri's almost like High Point, where there's a billion guys that could come on the court at any point. I will say Caleb Grill, I don't know if he's too spendy for me, simply because his price has come down a massive amount. And I know it just all depends if he makes shots or not. We're due for an explosion. So it's just a GPP play that I'm extremely interested in, simply because you could easily get 30 from him. And at 6'2", that's great value. Just all depends on if he makes shots or not. If he does make shots, then you're going to be in the running. If he doesn't, then you just close your laptop and tip your cap. It wasn't your day. But his price has come down a big amount, so I'm at least interested, and I know the upside's there. The rest of the lineup, I'm a little sketched out, because with Mitchell expected back, some of those minute totals were higher when he was out. So it's really just Caleb Grill for me, and enjoy the game, because I really love Drake, and I want to see if they can hit a bunch of shots with 2 seconds on the shot clock again and win this game.
Yeah, and I want to bring up Cam Manyahu. He projects extremely well at his minutes because he has such incredible rebounding rates overall, and he had some big games early in the season. So this is one of those players, kind of like Miles Bird of San Diego State. So he's like 70% owned, what was it, yesterday? And I had some exposure on Night Slate, of course. But the projections love certain guys because of rates and early production and sustained minutes. And Manyahu, you see here, he's projecting at almost 4.6x. I want to caution against that. The rebounding numbers probably won't be so good against Missouri. Fouls are going to be a factor for Cam. The minutes have kind of gone down for him too, because of the inability to stay out of foul trouble, but he's definitely got that upside. And as you can see there, 5-1 price for him ordinarily would be great. Maybe a little bit of a different matchup, but I didn't want to caution that, because there's a couple guys, you guys in the community have gotten used to it, and we made those adjustments. But there's certain players that just rates wise, they pop, and perhaps my system, we're always refining it and everything. But he's projecting quite well, but I'm not that high on him. So I wanted to be clear about that, because I know on the screen it might look really good. And he's definitely in play, but not a main team look for me. All right, moving on to the next game here, Utah State versus UCLA. Total of 144.5. The Bruins are 5.5-point favorites. And when this matchup was announced, after it got off air, we're starting to look at it quickly, and really stuck out to me as one that I felt like people might semi-fall in love with Utah State a little bit, but it just looked like a really obvious UCLA win to me. And I saw earlier in the Discord some chatter from you saying, yeah, UCLA should absolutely win this game with relative ease, because I worry about the matchup for Utah State as a whole. They've got some guys, but the UCLA toughness and defense just looks like it's going to be way too difficult for this Utah State team. And the Mountain West, they had the run with SDSU, but overall, I've said this a few times, they just had some rough outings in the tournament. Might this be a rougher outing here? From what you've said, I believe you think that as well. But what do you think? UCLA betting side for sure, but is this a game we can get down with some DFS stuff?
I certainly like UCLA, the money line. Actually, one of my best bets was a 2-game parlay, which is a little weird. I know we don't usually do those as much, but we talked about Gonzaga and just how confident we are with them. And like you said, it's a little scary that everybody in the world seems to be on Gonzaga, but there's just a better team. So I'm very confident in Gonzaga. So I was actually parlaying them with UCLA. So Gonzaga money line, UCLA money line. I think that's minus 109 right now on DraftKings. So you can pretty much double your money there. I like those two teams. I just don't have any confidence in Utah State. If you ever watch Utah State, they're just a really weird team. Mason Falsup's a very good player. He can shoot the ball from outside. He can facilitate, but he can't make a free throw. The dude has the yips at the free throw line. So I don't trust him in a late game situation if they're in it. I don't know what his percentage is, but I know watching Mountain West games, you send that guy to the line, he can't make a free throw, but then he can drain 2, 3, 4 3-pointers in a row. Ian Martinez is a pretty good scorer. The rest of their team's just kind of interesting. that Templin down low is a bit of a wild card. There's just really nothing on that team that strikes me as formidable enough to hang with UCLA and their toughness. Mick Cronin's brought teams deep in the tournaments. I think even if they throw Ade Mara down there, like how is Utah State going to deal with Mara down low? Even if he only
plays your guy too. That's your boy.
He is our boy. I mean, he's just he just nukes anytime he's out there on the court. But there's just so many ways that UCLA can attack you. There's just solid defense. I don't see Utah State, putting up 70 or 80 points. I feel like UCLA can comfortably win this. I do think UCLA price-wise, some of these DFS options too are pretty decent. I like Bilodeau a lot at 6'3". He's just a solid player. Like he's not going to kill you if he has a bit of a floor game, but he's more of like you said, a survivor or a cash gameplay potentially. Kobe Johnson's at 6K. That's pretty low for him. I know at times it's frustrating watching him because he's just kind of content to bring the ball up the court, pass it, and then just disappear for many possessions. Eric Daly is another frustrating one, but at 5.55, we know he has the 30, 40-point games in him. So again, a reasonable price point. And Mara's at 5.3. It's a little too expensive for my taste. It's just if we knew he was going to get the Braden Huff treatment for Gonzaga, then it's the lock button of all lock buttons. But we can't project that. So I mean, Bilodeau's probably my favorite play on UCLA. We don't want to play like roulette down low with some of the value guards. I know some of our Discord members say never UCLA because we've been burned by them so many times. But Bilodeau and Kobe Johnson, I could see those are kind of two mainstays on that team. Their price points are cheap enough where if this game goes like other Mountain West games have gone, where their opposing team really lays a licking on them, those guys could certainly pay off.
Yeah, I think a UCLA mini stack could actually be pretty formidable in the large field $20 GBP. Like I would never do that at this stage of the year with this version of UCLA in a main lineup, but there are some pieces here and they're very cheap. And they, guys like Eric Daly project well. We know his rates are great, and if he doesn't foul, like he pays off. And more often than not, the price point that he is right now, he's only 200 more than Ade Mara, which is crazy. But he can absolutely pay that price off. I know he's inconsistent and just as frustrating as some of these UCLA guards are, but they've all had their turns. Sebastian Max had good games. Dylan Andrews was successful for us early in the year. We've seen Sky Clark have some nice games. So yeah, this is a really good spot because it challenges the perception of the industry that, man, this team sucks for DFS. They're all inconsistent. Puts them in a position against Utah State where they should succeed quite well and might hang a pretty big number on them, honestly. Kind of look at the current total of 144.5. I don't normally look at UCLA totals, but that one looks kind of advantageous to me on the over. So I'm definitely considering that. Mara, at 5.3, he's just a great tourney look. Daly gets in foul trouble, Bilodeau, whatever, and they got to play Mara 20 minutes. Like it's a wrap, right? It's just gonna be curtains. He's gonna put up a huge number. And you've had some really successful games for him just because when they do give him that time, he burned all of us because Cronin gave him 8 minutes or something like that, but he still had well over a fantasy point per minute. It's like, just play this dude, man. He helps you win so many over William Kyle and guys like that. Lazar Stefanovic, like, get out of here. Dude's 7'3", and he's just all over the place. So certainly have interest in him for GPPs, even at the price increase. At least he's going to be like 2% owned. I think Daly, because of the way he typically projects on systems and models, will end up kind of chalkier. And on this slate, chalk can be like 15, 20% because it's such a large slate, right? But I do think Daly gets some ownership here. I don't know that he's safe enough for me to play him at that percentage, but he is definitely worth a shot here in some formats, simply because we know he can pay off. And Utah State front court, I don't think is going to have a very good time dealing with the physicality of the Bruins. As far as playing anyone from Utah State, the Valsev and Martinez are good. And we know that, but they're priced way up for me to be able to use them. I'm kind of waiting to see where Falsev, like, once this game's over, like, he's going to hit the portal like immediately. He's going to wait a minute or two. I feel like my Falsev is like hitting the portal very, very quickly, right? Carson Templin has game for sure. He lost some brownie points with me with that TikTok video that was released. No, never TikTok videos if you're in a basketball locker room. I don't know why this happens, but
really?
it's rough. It's rough. Yeah. So Templin's no longer a guy that I'm too fond of. I did like Templin's game on the court, but he's doing the TikTok trend dancing and he's getting
I'm
found.
out. I'm out too.
Yeah. See,
I'm out
that's
too.
what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. It's like it's a modifier to the negative. Like you do a TikTok video or dance as in the locker room, and it's just like I gotta move you down. Like, that's -5 fantasy points minimum.
Imagine doing that on a Mick Cronin team. Imagine trying to do that in his locker room.
It's rough because Templin has that look too, right? Like, goofier looking basketball player, has some game, like just easy to like him when he's on the court. Like if Utah State were to win this game and Templin had a big game, I think people would they would really like him, right? Because he has that look of a goofy dude. But that video, man, that was just a game ender for me. I can't get over it. There is some cheap looks here. Certain players, Tucker Anderson at 3.8. He's not playing enough minutes though, unfortunately, but he's got some nice little pop when he does. But for the most part, yeah, it's Bruins or bust, and I'm probably going to end up pretty underweight on this one, but I am betting it for sure. It's one of the heavier bets of the day one, round one for me. All right, Omaha.
I just wanted to throw out the Mason Falslove. He's a 40% three-point shooter and a 56% free throw shooter. So he's got some massive problems at the line. If that game's a one possession game late and I'm Mick Cronin, I'm fouling that dude. He 56%. Have you ever seen a guy's 3-point percentage approaching his free throw percentage? I don't know.
Very few times. I have seen it. Normally I can pull it out of my brain, but I'm a little ragged this week from all the stuff going on, but I have seen it only a handful of times, like less than 3 or 4 times. But yeah, that's nuts. That's just inexcusable, honestly. Doesn't even make sense. All right, let's move on to the next one here. St. John's versus Omaha. We have a game with a spread of 18.5, total of 148.5. This is going to be one where St. John's just drops like 100, right? Like this, they should put up a huge number. And I think even though that spread would indicate a blowout, it's still close enough for me where I don't think Pitino calls off the dogs too quick. I think we might actually get like a decent amount of minutes from the starters here and still enough in garbage time for guys like Simeon Wilcher. Perhaps if you're really feeling brave, you can go back to Abin Ayo after what happened when he was kind of popular, right? This does feel to me like a Vincent Chukwu appearance here for a few minutes in the end. So there's a lot to look at here for this St. John's team. Very high on them. I think we all are. Omaha, not going to be targeting them. We don't have to waste a whole lot of time talking about them. Normally, I like to try to find some at least playable options from a team like that, right? But this St. John's team is just going to absolutely destroy them. There are some decent plays on a normal basis or in their league, guys like Markel Sutton, Lance Waddles, but no. So I guess the decision here really is, do you trust St. John's or the coaching staff to play guys long enough to pay off these steep prices? Kadari Richmond's 9.5, RJ Lewis 9.4, Zuby's back up to 8.6 now after a couple of good games. Really leaves you down with Simeon Wilcher, Aaron Scott, and Davon Smith as the other options, all under 5.5. But I'm not necessarily super confident with Davon Smith right now because he's clearly not 100%. Aaron Scott's a great price, but he fouls a lot. We know that. And Simeon Wilcher, just reliant on his scoring a lot, which he may get enough in the garbage time period to pay off that meager 4.4. How are you approaching St. John's? Because I know you're also quite high on them like I am for the entire tournament.
Yeah, I'm going either top or bottom. I'm either paying up for the heavy hitters and hoping that they see a bunch of minutes and just rack up a boatload of points, or I'm going all the way down to Ibn Ayo. I think at least in terms of fantasy points per minute, if he gets 15 minutes of garbage time, he should smash. I think he's 3.7. If you're Pitino, you don't really have a deep bench. He kind of just plays his guys, and he just kind of lets them rot out there, even though they're very good players and they've had success. But why not take an opportunity to give him a little bit of a break if the score gets out of hand? I can't see him being like a Tom Thibodeau in the NBA, where he just rides his guy 40 minutes a game, win or lose. Right. It would make sense for him to kind of ease off the gas pedal a little bit with these guys late. And will RJ Lewis and Kadari Richmond, will they be able to do enough at their price points? Because they're priced pretty much the same they've been throughout Big East games that are expected to be competitive. So it's a little bit of a tough situation there. I don't really want to mess around in the middle either with Wilcher or Scott, because I mean, they're not really. Scott could be a good play. If St. John's is going to score 100, he's probably going to hit value. But is he going to be out there in garbage time? Are they going to leave him out and take out just Richmond and Lewis? Like, there's a lot of questions. So I kind of just want to either go all in and just play Lewis or Richmond and expect them, St. John's to put up 100. I'm probably not going to do it, but maybe you want to do that. But even Io is really the only guy who kind of intrigues me. And it's tough because if you know the team's going to score 100 points, I mean, there's going to be a lot of guys who hit value. It's just I don't know who it's going to be, or maybe it's going to be evenly distributed throughout some of the starters and the reserves. But even Io, just because of his fantasy points per minute, I expect at some point Patino will call off the dogs. If Iwachiku is going to be out on the court, then even Io is certainly going to be out there enough to do some damage.
One angle here is that because the slate looks like it could be really low scoring, there might just be merit to pay up for one of these St. John's guys and get your 35, and hope for a little, obviously more, but just to have that in your back pocket, know that like, okay, I'm paying for this 3.5, but that 3.5 here at this price is 35, 36, 38 fantasy points. The Terrence Edwards super value lineup that you're staring at in your head-to-heads. Edwards put up 20, that value got 3. Like suddenly, shoot, man, I got 38 here. It's not a 4X, but I'm out in front here with one player compared to his 2 because his super pay up and value didn't pay off. And I just ate the chalk values with Igor Milicic or whatever. Like there's some merit here to playing some of these St. John's guys, because I do think they get over 30 minutes regardless of how this plays out. We don't have a ton, especially lately, to go off of for actual blowouts. We have some in like January range that we can kind of reference. January 18th, they beat Seton Hall on the road 79-51. RJ Lewis still played 35 minutes in that game, put up a 44. But then they blew out Georgetown on the road 66-44. In 32 minutes, he put up a 27 because he was foot off the gas. Remember that game vividly because I had him, and just in the second half, he was out there for part of it, but just not really being aggressive. So that would be the main worry, is that the aggressiveness maybe isn't quite there. But I also think St. John's, being that, that's been a while since they've been in this position, a long time, want to start the turning on and kind of put the fear of God in everyone else and really just get the media talking, because they're always talking about, St. John's. A lot of people are picking them to lose early, believe it or not. And this will be a good kind of statement win for them, and just allow your guys and reward them. They rack up those stats. On the other side of it, you want those lesser used players to get that turning experience just in case you have to use them. Injuries happen. We saw it with Matt Rogers today of American, and you're done. And fouls happen, of course. If we saw it in the Xavier game, the refs thought that the game was about them and they wanted to call fouls on everyone. So there's a lot of merit each way there. And figuring that out could be very crucial, because St. John's games usually end up being pretty optimal, regardless of how they turn out, close or not. You usually see a St. John's guy on their slates on the optimal lineup, or pretty damn close. So I do trust Lewis. He burned me a couple of games ago, and then how I am. I went right back to him against Creighton, 22% owned, put up on near 50. So that was pretty nice. Now I'm a little bit more leery, but yeah, this is one that I'm going to have to eternalize. The night before, I'm still going to be thinking on that, because I am very tempted to just play him, because I feel very safe about it. And he doesn't have I don't feel like he has that mode where he's willing to slow down. I think the game will be out of hand, and if he's on the floor, he's still going to be driving down their throats. Like, he's a killer that way. All right, let's move on to the next game. US San Diego versus Michigan, a popular upset pick here. Michigan 2.5-point favorite, total of 142.5. At this point, we have analyzed and beaten this game into the ground on every show. You probably have read a lot of content about it too. Most people think the Tritons are going to win. Tape on them, excellent defense. They are very efficient with their possessions, and they go on these runs. Saw it in their title game against Irvine, down 15. You blink, suddenly they're up 15. They can go on these runs. Size advantage for Michigan. We know that with the 7-footers. Turnover disparity favors the Tritons. Michigan turn it over. Those 7-footers are very, very scary for the Tritons. So this one could go either way. There are arguments for both. When it comes to the DFS side, I do think it's one where if you don't have exposure, and it feels like this one could be an instant classic, right? Like we're going for overtime, buzzer beaters, all of that. And it's going to feel awfully bad having no exposure to it when Wolf gets 2 overtimes, Tate Jones gets 2 overtimes, perhaps even Gray. Trey Donaldson's been playing pretty well lately. So there are some pieces here I definitely want. But I don't have a lot of trust in Michigan these days. I do like to use their guards when they're cheap, but even when they're cheap, like Roddy Gale, they don't necessarily work out. And I know Gale had some ailments there that cost him some minutes last game, but man, it's very, very difficult to trust this Michigan team. And even Danny Wolf last game was awful. So how are you approaching this one? Knowing it's a popular game from the betting standpoint and might actually be somewhat popular for DFS as well. How are you approaching one like this? Because I could really honestly see it go either way. The arguments for both teams to win are very, very compelling.
Yeah, I haven't played Danny Wolf in a long time, and this is the first time that the spidey senses are out to maybe play him. Everybody seems to be on UC San Diego. Even whether they're right or wrong, it at least seems like this game's going to be competitive. It has a tight spread, and win or lose. I mean, it doesn't mean if Michigan loses, Danny Wolf can't hit value. I just think there's a massive size advantage for Michigan. All the talk's been about the turnover differential and just the turnovers in general between these two teams, the discrepancy. But Danny Wolf with the size advantage, I like the fact that even in bad games, he can rack up peripherals. This might be a tight game, could come down to the end. And Vlad Golden at 7'8" as well. I'm just really interested in the two Michigan bigs. It's tough to play them together. Usually you kind of have to just pick one, especially on a 16 gamer. I don't think you're going to play both. But if I was leaning one, I'd probably lean Wolf. His price is still palatable. I mean, we've seen him up in the 9K range. I don't know if we've seen him dip below 8K very often, if at all, in the last several months. So he's kind of priced at an appropriate spot. It's possible he could really take advantage in this matchup. This is one of the better mid-major teams in the field, but I still think Michigan probably pulls this one out. I think there's just a little too much helium and steam with UC San Diego, and just the size discrepancy and his ability to rack up peripherals. He's coming off a bad game. Price is still reasonable. And Wolf is probably the top guy in Michigan that I'd be targeting. And then UC San Diego, you know them way more than I do. I know Tate Jones is a stud. I don't know if I'll pay $9K for him. I know McGee was a chalk play last slate. I don't know if he would garner much ownership for you. You're better with the ownership than I am. Not too interested, but I'm sure he'll project pretty well. And Gray had a big game, I think, last time out for UC San Diego. But Danny Wolf's probably the one that I'd be playing. He's probably almost not necessarily a core play, but I feel most comfortable going there.
Yeah, and he does, no surprise, project, slightly over 4.1 at about 34 minutes. There was a lot of empty minutes for him in that last game, and as long as he's on the floor for 30 plus here, I do think absolutely will pay off. With the way that we've handled these Michigan bigs all season, it's basically been, if they're in a good spot or we're considering them, we're just taking the cheaper of the two, which would push us towards Vlad Golden, as you mentioned, at 7.8. But I do like the reasons for using Wolf in a tight game like this. UC San Diego doesn't, we can say they don't get rattled, but they really haven't been in this situation, right? So, they could be the most composed team ever, but we're going to have to see it on the big stage, especially in prime time, later game. Everybody in the country that cares about college basketball or brackets are going to be watching this game. I feel like Wolf will be the more composed of the two there between them two, and they're going to be leaning on him more. He's going to be quarterbacking, right? He's going to be facilitating, rebounding, blocking shots, taking shots. Like Wolf's just going to be doing everything for them. And when you have a big man like that can operate there and be at the top of the key at times, or at the the foul line, at the elbow, making those passes, making those right decisions, having the ball in his hands, those are just so valuable. Cameron Krutwig a few years ago for Loyola. Remember how valuable he was in that same type of role? Numerous guys like that. When Syracuse used to run the heavy zone, we used to go and seek out who's going to be the high post for that game and just run them no matter what. They'd crush. Like Wolf is just really primed for a huge game here. I don't even know if the projections are doing him justice. I think we could see him eclipse 40 in this spot. Less confident in Golden, but do see the discount there. And for lineup construction, it'll be a little easier to get to Golden, but I think Wolf is definitely in a great spot here. And the coming off of a bad game angle, it's one of our things that we might joke about it, but it does work. And for that reason alone, I definitely have interest. As far as the UC San Diego's top guys, they're all pretty expensive. McGee's 6'7". I guess he's technically playable, has a shot rate over 30%. Aniwa Tate Jones, I had to practice that name for a long time, so I try to show that one off a few times per show. Really like him. I'm probably looking at some of his props, honestly, probably not getting there at 9K. And then Hayden Gray, he had too good of a game against Irvine. His price is too close to 8K. Not sure we can get there, but I do like Hayden Gray, and he's going to be important. If the Tritons pull this one off and get to the second round, that's where we're going to want to pull and empty the clip on Hayden Gray, because he's going to be very important for that potential second round matchup, which might be against Yale if we have our way. As far as anybody else, Trey Donaldson, he's okay. Just the composure for that UC San Diego team and defense. The turnovers are it's hard to get away from that angle. I mean, it's been beaten, dead horse style, but the Donaldson, Roddy Gale, Reuben Jones, like the turnovers that they're going to have is just going to lessen their overall upside. More painful on FanDuel, certainly, but I don't think we can use them in this matchup because of that alone. And obviously their inconsistency as scorers. I don't mind Amari Burnett at 5'2". I've actually had some pretty decent success for him, but I just wish he could put two halves together. He always has like a good first half and then disappears the second, or he bricks the entire first and then has a huge second. It's like, I don't understand why he can't put two halves together. If he ever does, it's going to be a huge slate for him. All right, that takes us to the last game on the slate here, UNC Wilmington. This is a team you're familiar with versus Texas Tech. Total of 142.5. The Red Raiders are 14.5-point favorites. The good news for Texas Tech, they should have their full complement of players, important players, I should say. Not as good of news for us because it complicates matters and takes away a play that I was really looking forward to. When the brackets were announced, the pricing came out super early. I thought, if Darian Williams has to miss or is limited, or if Chance McMillan is just shut down for the foreseeable future, 5.7K for Christian Anderson. He's been really good to us, even though that's an elevated price for him. That was going to feel like a smash for me because 32, 33 minutes for him, even when McMillan and Rary Williams came back and they had the full onslaught there for about 2 games before they went down again, he was still firing away. And the bench has gotten so short for the Red Raiders. Kerwin Walton as a starter, we know he's going to get that 15 to 20 minutes and then go sit down. There's a lot of upside still for Anderson, but I just not able to get there with him, with Chance McMillan around and Darian Williams. But it wouldn't surprise me if he still got close to 4X regardless. So that's the part that's a bummer here. Chance McMillan, really cheap at 4.8. He, minutes wise, I've tagged him for 26. I don't know if that's going to be too high or too low. Normally he plays over 32, right? But he's been out for a few games. The extent of what ails him, I just don't know if we can trust that even at the 4.8. Darian Williams is very cheap for him at 6.7. He's an excellent tournament play. If he was 100% healthy, hadn't just been missing games on and off for the last month, that 6.7 price for him would be an auto lock button for obvious reasons. He projects extremely well, just taking into account the price, his rates and everything. But I really, really worried about him coming back, having some kind of misstep or re-aggravation and playing 10 minutes and then having to sit out. That's my concern with Darian Williams. So it keeps him in the GPP category. JT Toppin is great in this spot. He should get, I think he's going to get a lot of free throws. He's 9.8K, so he's under 10K. We can get there. The front court for UNCW, I don't think they're ready for what JT Toppin's going to bring. Harlan Obioha is a fouling machine. You've pointed that out several times. There's probably zero chance that he can stay on the floor with Toppin around. This just looks like such a good game for him if we can get there. And that might be where the decision lies. Braden Smith in what is a perceived excellent matchup for him, or JT Toppin in what is definitely a great matchup for him. I think you can make a decision on one of them and fit them in your lineup and make all of this work. Probably can't fit both. So I think that might be the decision there at the pay-ups. As far as the UNCW side, kind of, made you play detective a little bit, saying, hey, I have a play that I like. Kind of feels like the Trevelyan Queen play from a few years ago. Doesn't have the rates of Queen, but he's cheap. He's getting minutes, and when he's out there, they rely on him heavily. Talking about Nolan Hodge, who's priced there at 4.2, going to be a 1% owned play easily. And Texas Tech is not the best matchup to be trying to take speculative value against by any means. But he's been playing elevated minutes the last few, played 33 in their last game alone. They have a lot of trust for him. Individual on-ball defender. He's very solid, which is why he's been getting more minutes. And he's taken a ton of threes when he's out there. And he does contribute just enough in other categories to be a viable option at 4.2. You see 29 minutes, 29 and 33 over his last three, 23 and 24 in the 2 games before that. So we're at least going to get a mid-20s output from him with possibly more. And he's been in the double digits in 4 of those last 5 games as well. Granted, one of them was 15, one of them was 13, but one was 22, one was 24, and then one was 7. So we've got some look here, a bit of a sneakier value with Nolan Hodge. And that's one of those plays where there's a lot of risk with it, but sometimes you have to take that chance. And it's been a couple years since we had a really slam dunk, low owned value that popped off like Trevelyan Queen did all those years ago against Auburn. But I feel like this Nolan Hodge play might be that spot here. Nobody's going to use him. I'm going to say the same thing they did about the Queen play. It's a silly play. Why would you want to use Nolan Hodge? He's not that good. He's not going to do anything. I think he's going to do something here. I feel pretty good about it. So that's my UNCW play, and JT Toppin on the other side if you can afford him. Last game on the slate, the hammer, as it were. What are you doing here? What do you like? You're going to have some exposure, I'm sure. Well, where are you at with it?
Yeah, I really just agree with almost everything you said. JT Toppin with 2 teammates who are I listened to that press conference, and their coach was not very confident about he was confident that they would play, that Darian Williams and Chance McMillan, but there's an ominous kind of quote, like what they'll be able to do is to be determined. So that's not an exact quote, but it's something to the effect of, we don't really know how effective they're going to be. And we've seen Darian Williams start games or come off the bench and just leave. Like he just comes, and of course it's when we play him, but he's always, he's out there and then he's not. We can't really rely on that. Same thing with McMillan. I mean, McMillan would be a smash play if we knew he's playing over 30 minutes. But again, he's almost like a Boogie Fland, where it's like, do we really want to take that chance? Is he really going to play as many minutes? So Toppin's kind of just throw the hammer down and hope he puts up 40 or 50 against this team. Obioha and Wilmington will not be able to stop him. He'll probably foul out, like you said. Obioha is an interesting player because he had massive Division I football offers and decided to play basketball at UNC Wilmington. I kind of want to, and I'm not saying UNC Wilmington's a bad program. I mean, they're in the NCAA tournament. They've had success. They've gotten there, but it's just, you just wonder what the thought process was there. I think he had offers at like Ohio State. Like, I'm talking big time Division I programs. He opted against it to play basketball with the Seahawks, but
that's crazy.
Yeah, and I think Nolan Hodge, I like it. It's certainly a 1%er. If there's a half percenter, maybe Greedy Williams at almost the same price point. If you just don't want to go with Nolan Hodge, you could go with Greedy Williams and hope something magical happens. But yeah, Toppin, I certainly, if you're going to pay up for somebody, I'm okay with that. I know I just said I like Danny Wolf. I don't know if we have enough value to go Wolf and Toppin as like a double hammer. But if you really have enough salary where you can pay almost 10K, I think Toppin with 2 injured teammates who we don't know exactly what they're going to do. The offense will probably flow through him. UNC Wilmington doesn't have anybody that's going to stop him. Certainly merit to doing that.
Yeah, that's where I'm like, Toppin has had some games where we loaded him and it was like, what is he doing, right? But more often than not, especially in the latter half of the season, he has just been an absolute smash, and he can just fill it up so quickly. And Elijah Hawkins has this newfound like facilitator persona now. Like he's always been a facilitator, but he's like really leaning into it now. And he's just setting the table so well for JT Toppin, absolutely just crushing it. And looking at this UNCW front court, I know a lot of people will be on Braden Smith, and for good reason, as we talked about. But when I look at it on an individual pay up, if I can only fit one, I do feel like at this moment right now, with 10 hours to go before that game, before we tip off, that JT Toppin is the guy that I'm going to want to get to. So it's sub 10K, it's reasonable. We should be able to get there. Probably takes us out of the running for a St. John's guy who I personally like. You mentioned Danny Wolf. Like it's gonna be tough. I think we do see people try to squeeze in 2, maybe even 3 of those 8K or above guys. They're gonna take some really heinous values, but if those guys all hit their ceilings, it might just be enough to move on. But it's a little bit too risky for me. But as we've gone through and made it through the entire slate now, it's not like the mid-range is any better. It's not as much of a slam dunk. The Friday games, I think we're going to have a lot of a different feeling about. There's some really good matchups there that we're gonna want exposure to. This one is just, I'm actually happy it starts this way. The last 2 NIT slates have been video game scoring, right? Because that's just how the NIT is. This one's going to be really, really low, and I like that. That's my thing. All right, so that takes us to the end. We have a couple questions here. Any props that we love tomorrow, and then any best bets? Why don't you drop? I was going to say, why don't you drop some on us, and then I'll pull up my prop board here.
I did mention just in case anyone tuned in late, the Gonzaga UCLA moneyline parlay -109 at DraftKings, at least when I looked at it last. I feel pretty confident about that one. This one, I don't feel great about this. I just did this mostly for the show, just to have fun. Creighton +3. I've seen around. I know we talked about everybody seems to want Louisville playing near their home, and I've been talking up Kalkbrenner. So I'm just going to put my money where my mouth is. Creighton +3. Hopefully if they lose the game, it's at least a 1-possession game they could cover. And then this is an odd prop, but I was just going through a bunch of them. Ring Maleth, I don't know if I'm saying that name right, on SIU Edwardsville, over 7.5 points. He's only been below 8 points twice since the calendar flipped to 2025. And I know it's a horrific matchup. It's Houston. But like I mentioned earlier in the show, when I did some research on the 16 seeds, I said, how are the starters doing in these games that blow out against the ones when they're losing by 40 points? And for the most part, the starters were somewhat unaffected on the 16 seeds. They would play through until the final whistle at times, even when they're down 30 or 40. So I think, he could get there even against the Houston starters potentially. He takes a lot of shots. He's certainly active. 8 points is a really low threshold. So over 7.5 on Ring Maleth. That was my prop that I'm sure no one on earth has. And I
love it. I love that one.
I'll be paying attention to it.
Oh yeah, I love that one. I'll be definitely putting that in too. Then that's a great one. I'm excited to hear that because I think with these matchups, the 15s versus 2s, 16s versus the 1s, like the teams already are up against it, right? So they have no real choice but to play their starters, or if they've got a 6-man that they use, like those top 6, they've got to play the entire game to even try to make it respectable. And respectable might be a 30-point loss. They go to their bench, 8, 9, 10, 11 guys, they might be losing by 60. So there's a lot of merit there. That's a great, call out, but you hadn't checked because those guys are going to still, regardless of blowout or not, play 35 plus minutes just because they have to. There's no choice. SIU doesn't have a 9th, 10th, 11th guy that's going to give them quality minutes against Houston. It's just not going to happen. So I have a couple props as well. I'm going to have a lot more, a ton in me loading the tracker pretty much all night. On FanDuel, the Montana versus Wisconsin game, there is a combo prop for Stephen Crowell, points plus rebounds. That's set at 16.5. That's minus 106 currently. The under is minus 120. So FanDuel thinks Crowell's going to be under that. But I think this is one of those games where Crowell's going to rebound quite effectively. Might be up against it scoring the basketball sometimes, but the putbacks will be there. Generally a really good matchup against Montana in the front court. And if I don't land on Crowell as a DFS mainstay for this slate, because it's scary, I'm going to be on that prop over 16.5. I just feel like a 10-10 game is very possible for him. So that feels light to me. And then we do get a plus money number on Money Williams in the same game here. His prop is currently at 13.5 points plus 100. This will be a game. I know he only played 19 in their last one. He's going to play 30 plus here, just has to. I think Montana still ends up scoring a fair amount. They're going to give up a ton, but Money's like a 20-point game, waiting to happen here with all the volume. So plus money at 13.5 for the over. Yes, count me in all the way in on that one for Money Williams. A couple of props here. I like not props, but sides. VCU plus 2.5. That was one that I kind of flipped on. At first, I liked BYU to advance, but after really kind of marinating on it overnight, I've kind of flipped myself. And I don't do that very often. I usually stay on that initial take, line in the sand. I do not change my mind very often. I think a lot of people appreciate that about me. But that was one that I felt like I had to go back on. But if BYU wins, I'll actually be super happy because I do like my man Richie Rich. But I just think VCU is going to win that one outright, but at least cover. High Point, that one's been bet down a little bit. I think we got that at plus 10.5 on Monday. It's now plus 8.5, so not as good. I still like them to cover that even. So that is one I'm looking at. Wisconsin, Montana, betting a lot on this game. Props and sides. Minus 16.5 for Wisconsin. I do like them to cover that. Montana, just their defense is so terrible, man. They're going to have to play my man Austin Patterson a lot, Mr. Steals Machine, because their defense is so bad. This just seems like it should be a 20-point win for Wisconsin. I'm putting a lot of faith in Wisconsin. I put so much faith in Wisconsin last year that I thought they would make a Final Four run, and they lost in the first round to James Madison. So here I am again, similar to like what I do with Tennessee and Rick Barnes. Pick them far, they lose early. Back on Wisconsin. I don't think they're longed for this world. Like the second round matchup, I think between them and VCU or BYU is going to knock them out, but they should have some fun here against Montana at least. Like the Gonzaga minus 6.5. I know some people are leery to lay that 6.5 against Georgia, but just the history of Gonzaga in the tournament, Mark Few and the way that they play, they're so good. I think Gonzaga on a neutral court against what I would perceive to be a middling SEC team, they're going to take care of business, especially if they play like they played in the WCC final. Yale plus 8.5. I like Yale money line as well against Texas A&M, sprinkling that. Drake, I like to cover 6.5 against Missouri. I think that'll be a one-possession game, but I do have Missouri winning that. UCLA minus 5.5 and money line. I know you've got your parlay on that one. And then UC San Diego. With how popular it is, I got to be a bit of a fish. I bet it earlier in the week, but I'll be probably hitting the money line too, just once again. And then Texas Tech, regardless of Darian Williams playing, stopping, not playing a lot, Chance McMillan maybe getting eased in, 14.5 against them. I think Toppin can carry that by himself in the way that Hawkins been playing, Christian Anderson. Texas Tech's still a very good team, battered or not. Wilmington, I just don't have faith in them to not foul a bunch. And I think what's going to happen is midway through the second half, they're going to be in the double bonus. It's going to slow the game way down painfully at the end of the night. But we're just going to get a ton of points with the clock stopped. And Texas Tech is going to balloon that lead up to 20, 25, 26, possibly even 30 by the time it's all said and done. Probably won't win by 30, but they're going to cover that 14.5. So those are the best bets that we have in the props. Love the Malith call. That's some next level stuff there. I'll be doing the rest of the minutes refinements here when we get off air, and then I'll have a full rundown in the tracker of props. And also on Prize Picks, and underdog as well, not just on the books, because I know different states and different legalities and all of that. So that'll take us to the end here. It was a long one, I know, 2.5 hours. Jeez, thank you so much, Adam. I appreciate you coming on. I know you're there on the East Coast there. It's going to be an early morning for you. Always blessed to have you on. And, there's plenty more rounds left. So, the slates will get smaller after Friday. Won't last as long on the show, but definitely want to have you on once again anytime.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, as always.
All right. Appreciate everybody. Let's get those green screens and window trips going. Tonight was a little bit of a wacky NIT slate, but this is it. 16 gamer, all these heavy prize pools. There's Survivor stuff out there on Splash Sports and on DK as well. Lots of opportunities to make money before we go into spring and we go into hibernation because we do sleep in May. Thanks, everybody. Good night. We'll be back tomorrow.